You. Lobo's whole body trembled at the words, as if struck by lightning. He stared at David with a devilish glare, his finger frozen in midpoint, unable to speak. What? Didn't you hear me? David's face went cold. Earlier, Lobo had been arrogant, indestructible, an insufferable toad of a man. Now the tables had turned. Lobo feared death and felt pain less than he feared losing face. If anyone in the universe saw him reduced to this, humiliated and controlled, it would be worse than dying. I heard it. Normally reckless, Lobo ground his teeth, furious but mute. Purple Lantern, what do you want me to do? I can turn and leave right now, abandon the mission to capture you. Do you honestly think you could capture me, Lobo? David's gaze flicked to the others. In the distance, Ryan and his team, Brainiac's agents, were closing fast. They'd seen what happened and, unsurprised that a prolonged standoff would only bleed both sides dry, had launched across the lunar plane straight at David and his companions. I said from the start, this wasn't necessary. That washed-up Lobo is no match for the primary target. Dimax, the leopard-headed brute among the four, sneered as he streaked forward like a bolt of lightning. In the end, it's on us to finish the job. Be careful. The primary target is stronger than Brainiac's data suggested, Ryan, the leader, called coolly as he hovered above the surface. Parallax, a dinosaur-headed creature, flicked her stinger-tipped tentacle and mused, I wonder how much poison he can withstand, while Flower of Paradise, winged and androgynous with eyes like icicles, said nothing. An efficient killing machine. There's a handful over there. Deal with them, Ryan ordered. As a few figures emerged on the horizon, David folded his arms and nodded toward Lobo with a dismissive chin. Grandpa Lobo never takes orders from anyone. Lobo had expected trouble, but not David's insolent nonchalance. He exploded. Oh, so are you coming or not? David arched an eyebrow. The green lantern ring on his finger condensed its energy into a small, glowing button. In truth, other than Earth, he had no way of instantly broadcasting Lobo's picture across the cosmos to socially assassinate him. But Lobo didn't know that. He wouldn't believe that a powerful man who knew Grandpa Lobo and carried a lantern ring could be a local nobody who'd never left the star system. He suspected David had acquired the ring on the black market. No Corps member would be allowed to use lethal force casually. Damn it, not again. Seeing David about to press the button, Lobo, equal parts indignant and afraid, yanked his chain and charged the approaching creatures, desperate to act before David could ruin him. David folded his arms and snorted. Once is enough. He'd finally caught Lobo in something he couldn't shake, and he'd keep that leverage for life. Clark watched from the side, a little stunned. He hadn't expected the monster they'd always heard about, the one who survived the sun, to be humbled with such a petty humiliation. You monsters, where did you come from? He muttered. On the lunar plane, Lobo swung his chain in a shriek that cut through the air, forcing the attackers to pause. He bared his teeth. You were watching when old Lobo got put on a leash, weren't you? It couldn't be a coincidence. They were hired to take down a target on this moon, and another hostile force showed up. But Lobo didn't care about conspiracies, only about revenge. If these bastards had been watching him make a fool of himself, they deserved worse than whatever job they were sent for. So what? Dimax crouched, muscles coiled like springs, ready to unleash cataclysmic power. The others were cold and contemptuous. All of you, go to the grave for Baolang Day, someone spat. Lobo swung the chain, intent on silencing them forever. Leave this one to me. You go capture the target. I'll join you once I'm done with him. Dimax cracked the ground with a push of his legs and shot forward like a living cannon. His claws struck Lobo in a blink, a flurry of blows aimed at weak spots. Lobo dodged twice, then stopped trying to avoid the hits. A ragged wound opened in his neck, but he barely registered it and sent the chain's hooked end whipping back. Dimax, with the speed and talons of a leopard, dodged and lunged. Lobo took a mountain of force straight on and was slammed into the ground, pinned. Dimax gaped, jaws full of saber-toothed fangs, and snapped at Lobo's throat. Lobo shoved his arm into Dimax's mouth like it was nothing, bones crunching and blood spraying. Damn, your breath's worse than mine after a long night. Then he landed a brutal punch on Dimax's gut, sending the leopard-headed monster flying. Lobo staggered to his feet, arm shredded down to the bone but grinning. Little kitty, let old Lobo pull out your teeth. Still calling yourself the universe's greatest bounty hunter? Dimax growled, face dark. He lashed out with claws and bile, the two of them colliding like two mad beasts in a bloody fight. Ryan and two others bypassed Lobo and charged at David and Clark. Sent by Brainiac, they wouldn't show mercy. Clark moved like a bolt of lightning and threw a punch. Kryptonian, surrender! Flower of Paradise folded her hands, bloomed, and unleashed an energy torrent that drove Clark back. Burning, he dodged and clenched his fists, ready to strike again. Wait! David's voice brought him up short. Clark turned. What is it? Look at their wrists. David's warning made Clark glance, and he saw it. Each of the three attackers wore a wristband set with a glowing green stone. Is that kryptonite? Clark's heart kicked. Each of them carried a piece of kryptonite. You're only noticing now? David sounded mildly amused at Clark's delayed reaction. Don't forget where kryptonite comes from. Kryptonite was the product of Krypton's destruction. Some fragments had landed on Earth with Kal-El. There weren't many intact pieces left on Earth now, only traces. Out in the wider universe, though, things were different. When Krypton went, Brainiac was there. He bottled Kandor. His stockpile of kryptonite is conservatively enough to fill a lake. If Brainiac had come himself, he might have used different tactics. But sending subordinates to capture a target, equipping them with kryptonite made the plan simple and cruel. David glanced back toward the savage clash, surprised at the level of power facing Lobo. Each of them could hold their own against Lobo for a while. Where did Brainiac find these underlings? Ryan and the others stared at Clark with eyes full of hatred. They hated David too. The Earthling was their primary target on this mission. Kryptonian Earthling, do you not know by whose hand you will fall today? Ryan said, hovering in the air, her skin deathly pale. She looked like an emotionless harbinger of death. We were made by Kryptonians, she continued coldly. They did experiments across universes, altering the embryos of powerful races, pouring their ambition and madness into us. They forged killers, unrecognizable, and now we finish what they started. We were created to do the dirty work even you Kryptonians couldn't handle. Clark's face hardened. He hadn't realized these people were products of genetic engineering. I don't want to argue about the crimes of some Kryptonians, he said quietly, clenching his fists. But Brainiac is the universe's greatest madman. He's destroyed countless worlds. Are you sure you want to help him? David's expression shifted. It wasn't surprising they were bioweapons. Doomsday himself had been a product of Kryptonian biotech, an uncontrollable ultimate weapon. It was the Master who opened our eyes to this world, one of the others replied. Parallax lashed out with her barbed tentacles. They unfurled like living spears. The kryptonite bands on her wrists began to glow, bathing Clark in a green radiance that made him stagger in midair. The Master woke us, optimized our genes, made us stronger, she said with a mocking grin. For his will, we will die. The green light ate into Clark's defenses. His steel-like resilience faltered. A venomous stinger aimed straight for his chest. He tried to dodge, but it would have been over, except David acted. Calmly raising his hand, he warped gravity and yanked Clark out of the path of the sting, thwarting their strike. Back off, Clark, David warned. He shot upward, violet light coiling in his eyes. The local gravity twisted and roiled under his control. If you're loyal to Brainiac, then there's nothing else to say, he added. The four suddenly felt as if a mountain sat on their backs. The pressure pinned them and forced warning instincts to the surface. David condensed a lance of lightning and hurled it like divine retribution. The blast tore across the battlefield, incinerating everything it touched. They had thought the power David used against Lobo before was fearsome, but this was different. He threw lightning like a god. Flower of Paradise, barely dodging, retreated with a stunned look. Did he not even use his full strength against Lobo before? She panted. Ryan slammed her greatsword into a colossal boulder to try to block the spear. The rock vaporized under the lightning. The three attackers had expected that with injury and coordination they could take David. None of them had Lobo's regenerative ability. But David's blows were mountains and waves. Even Raven, the one best at direct combat, found herself struggling. David's fist smashed into Ryan's shielded sword arm. The force sent her whipping backward. Pain seared her sword hand, nearly shattering it. Flower of Paradise, firing energy from the air, was suddenly clutching her arm. David had grabbed her and snapped it like a twig. "You're the weakest in strength among you, and yet you come close enough to die," he said coldly. Panic flared in Flower of Paradise. She poured herself into a blinding burst of light, a white sun that blasted David back. The brilliance faded and she collapsed, her luminous skin dimmed, clutching her ruined arm as she fled. From behind her, a green tentacle lashed out, Parallax's stinger closing in on David's brow. "Die!" she hissed. David's fingers closed on the tentacle in a flash. Parallax's venom sprayed like a high-pressure stream, sickly black-green. It grazed his face, slashing through a crater wall hundreds of meters away as if it had burned a channel through stone. The corroding trail left a ribbon of death on the lunar rock. If there had been life on the moon, it would have withered instantly. "Too slow!" Parallax snarled and prepared another strike. David's expression didn't change. He murmured, "Shazam!" and divine lightning answered. It crawled along the tentacle he held and engulfed Parallax. The electricity charred flesh to the scent of roasted meat. She convulsed, collapsed, and went limp, unconscious, badly burned. David watched her on the ground, frowning slightly in surprise. That woman's strength surpasses a normal Kryptonian's, yet she seemed especially vulnerable to magic. "A lower magic resistance than Kryptonians?" Clark guessed. David only smirked. "Parallax." Raven and Flower of Paradise, furious, redoubled their attacks. One specialized in defense, one in energy assault, but neither could match David's raw power. The clash tore the surface of the moon, cracks spiderwebbed outward, craters shattered, and molten scars sizzled where cosmic energy and lightning met regolith. David noted, with a measure of disappointment, that only Parallax had very low resistance to magic. The divine lightning had little extraordinary effect on the other two. "That wouldn't change the outcome, though." "I'll hold him," Raven growled. "You, get that Kryptonian boy." Raven lunged, forcing David back dozens of meters with a fierce blow, buying time to try and seize Clark. Clark, weakened by the kryptonite radiation, had retreated using his lantern ring and could only watch from a distance. He wondered if his ring could block the radiation and give him a chance. David was not going to let Flower of Paradise bypass him. He extended a hand and unleashed a supergravity pull like a miniature black hole. It yanked her backward, her speed collapsing. Even with one arm broken, she could not escape. He clamped her in his palm and squeezed. Bones snapped with a sick, brittle report as her skeleton collapsed under crushing pressure. Blood spurted from her mouth, a flash of lightning, and she was dead. "Die," David said, voice flat. Rage filled Ryan's eyes. She threw everything she had into a counterattack, flinging the mountain-sized fist above her aside and lunging at him. David shot into the air and came down like an inexorable god. His fist smashed into Ryan and sent her crashing into the ground. She coughed blood. Before she could rise, another colossal fist hammered her again and again. The lunar ground crumbled, shockwaves stripped dust for miles, and Ryan was left in a crater, barely breathing, her broken sword beside her. David returned the mass he had stolen to the moon and shrank back to his normal size. He picked up Ryan, who could no longer fight, and ended her life with a bolt of divine lightning. Then he turned and struck Parallax, still convulsing on the lunar dust, once more. "What a pity," he said mildly. He felt a faint, strange regret. These three bioengineered assassins had been worth a lot, emotion points, he thought, equivalent to many Kryptonians. But unlike ordinary Kryptonians, there was no way to trap or imprison them. Killing them was the only reliable option. "Not so bad. There's still Lobo," he muttered, looking across the crater. The last of the four, Dimax, lay a short distance away, torn and bleeding, his wounds gruesome. Furious at the deaths of his comrades, he reared like a cornered beast and roared, "Ryan, Parallax, I'll rip you apart." Lobo, clothes tattered and smeared with blood like a scavenger who just wrestled a beast, grinned wildly. His wounds had already knit over. He hauled himself toward Dimax and wrapped a chain around the other man's throat, dragging him into a brutal hold. "Where do you think you're going, kitty cat?" he taunted. Dimax thrashed, talons tearing at Lobo's arm. Blood splattered. For a beat it looked like he might break free, then a sickening crack split the air. Lobo snapped his neck. Dimax's eyes bulged, his head lolled, and he was a corpse. "Finally done," Lobo panted as he pushed the corpse away. "I'm exhausted." He lifted himself from the ground, breathing hard. Today's exertion beats all my workouts from the last month, he complained. He looked over at David and, half joking, half serious, said, "Hey, can you delete those photos now?" David crossed his arms and sneered. Lobo's face flushed. He had hoped to play the obedient ally until David grew tired, then snatch the lantern ring and wreck it. Instead, David had cut through 3 opponents without breaking a sweat. Lobo felt his plan collapse. "Damn it," Lobo groused aloud. "Why is that purple glow kid so strong? And when am I ever getting those photos back?" Chapter 183, Tyrant Despair Demon, 4K6. Even with the photos in David's hand, Lobo wasn't going to obey. He had planned to wait until David weakened, then strike suddenly to snatch the lantern ring. But when the fight ended, Lobo studied David and found no sign of fatigue. David's calm, inscrutable demeanor made the Zarnian click his tongue in frustration. Finally finished. Clark flew down, a troubled frown on his face. With kryptonite in the area earlier, he'd been forced to hang back and watch. After David notified Earth of the situation and confirmed he no longer needed assistance, he prepared to return, ignoring Lobo, who was still trying to bully him into destroying the photos. Before leaving, David intended to take the 4 bodies and Brainiac's ship. Those bodies can still be useful, biological specimens for research. And Brainiac's ship might yield technology to study. Even if the finds weren't priceless, David didn't want to leave them behind. He knew the US government would certainly send teams to the moon to search, and he didn't want others to profit from the battle he and the League had fought. "This is Brainiac's ship?" Lobo went quiet for a moment when he saw the skull-shaped craft Clark had hauled up to carry back to Earth. Brainiac's ship, whose name and image alone inspired nightmares across the universe, was far more notorious than Lobo himself. "You've got beef with Brainiac? He put that bounty out on you?" "You're not completely stupid," David said, looking at Lobo. "They say he's obsessed with perfect evolution. He destroys every world he visits and preserves only a single city for study." Lobo chewed on his cigar and scowled. "Study?" Brainiac's insistence that the 2 be taken alive pointed to research, another step toward whatever perfection the mad AI sought. As the last Zarnian in the universe, Lobo knew his physiology would be extremely valuable to a mad scientist. He thought of all the monsters out there and snarled, "You don't scheme against Grandpa Lobo and get away with it." He whistled, summoned his space cycle, flipped onto it, left a clearly insincere threat behind, and roared off into the stars. "Purple Green Lantern, if you leak Grandpa Lobo's photos, I'll be hunting you forever." David smiled faintly, indifferent. If Brainiac was coming after them, he'd have his hands full for a while. He should get a taste of what it's like to be tormented by an unkillable cockroach. Kara had been upset earlier, so David and Clark had deliberately spared her the details when they went to League headquarters. From home, she watched television as Lobo suddenly attacked the city, fighting against Clark and David. At first, she was terrified and wanted to help. Later, seeing David nearly crush Lobo, she relaxed. Jonathan and Martha worried less than before once they learned Overman had intervened, though Overman's attack had leveled an entire block, the worst of the destruction. When they found out it had been necessary to stop a powerful enemy and save lives, they understood. Mostly, only part of that huge chunk of gold you gave the city last time has been used. Everyone who lost property in the disaster has been compensated, more than fairly. That evening, on the warehouse's 2nd floor, Clark scrolled through online reactions to the incident. "Some people are even complaining you didn't destroy his apartment while you were at it," he said, shaking his head. Since David had given the city such a massive sum, the municipal government had been under close public watch. They'd had to use the money for what it was intended, and the funds had actually been applied properly. The luckiest thing this time was how fast our response was. There were almost no casualties. His face turned serious. "Did nobody hear what Lobo said?" David looked surprised. From his read of public sentiment, reactions shouldn't have been so simple, especially since Lobo had targeted him and Clark. At first, some people wondered if we invited this danger, but after I told Cyborg, speaking for the League, explained Brainiac was behind it, and those doubts disappeared. Clark considered that. We made an enemy because we stopped Brainiac from destroying Earth. David said nothing. If people thought that way, it saved them trouble. In truth, Brainiac's current priority to capture the two of them now outweighed any desire to destroy the planet. Clark's expression darkened. Is my kryptonite weakness unavoidable? After a pause, Clark spoke with thinly veiled anxiety. Jor-El had taught him about the meteorite's origin. They were named kryptonite. Powerful enemies kept coming, and having such a fatal vulnerability felt unacceptable. He was no longer a frightened teenager. Earth and his family needed him. He fretted he wasn't strong enough. You can't always be at my side. David smiled. You can change it. Clark blinked. He had only spoken in frustration, not expecting an answer, yet David offered one readily. You need to spend a lot of time under the sun. Kryptonite was a weakness for Kryptonians, but not an absolute, immutable fate for Superman. In some continuities, prolonged exposure to the sun increased resistance to kryptonite. Some even stayed in the sun for centuries and emerged practically godlike. Again with the sun. How long? Clark sounded half exasperated, half hopeful. David explained, not just basking in sunlight above Earth. If you can, fly into the sun itself. Being bathed directly in solar energy is on another level. Clark's eyes lit up. Can I do that? You can, David said, hesitating. The plan carried risks. Start carefully. Don't stay too long at first, and have Uncle Jor-El monitor you. There was a real danger. Too much solar energy too fast could overload cells. In some universes, a Superman who absorbed too much solar energy in a short span became immensely powerful but suffered cellular collapse and died shortly after. David didn't want to sound alarmist. Life was inherently dangerous. If something went wrong, Clark could stop immediately. Okay, I understand. Clark nodded eagerly, committing it to memory. Oh, and a few days from now, new members will be joining the League. You have to be there. David waved it off. Their earlier meeting had been interrupted by Lobo. With the dust settled, the League had voted to bring in all three provisional members, Firestorm, Element Woman, and Hawkgirl. Brainiac's renewed attack had reminded Batman and the others they needed more strength. David didn't object, even though he knew Hawkgirl was an agent sent by Thanagar. Thanagar has nth metal. Nth metal was one of the few miraculous substances in the universe. It enhanced strength, reduced energy damage, nullified certain magic, granted flight, and in its purest form could grant longevity or even a shot at resurrection. David was very interested. Pure nth metal's magic nullifying properties can even weaken magicians like Dr. Fate. Beyond metal and politics, Hawkgirl herself was a capable warrior. If she came to Earth to gather intelligence, she needed a cover story. Given how many enemies the League had made, whether Thanagar would summon her again remained to be seen. And Hawkgirl herself isn't bad. She's a famous hero. If she came to infiltrate, she was deceived by her rulers, not inherently evil. David glanced at the panel. The Lobo incident had riled people and boosted his fusion progress considerably. The coming days would likely be a period of significant growth. A few days later, the day the new League members were to arrive, Barry Allen sprinted along a country road, anxious and excited. I have to make a good impression on the new recruits. He'd only been with the League under a year, but his speed and talent ranked among their best. Still, his shy, humble personality had made him feel like an intern. Today, he planned to act like an old hand and give the newcomers a thorough tour of League headquarters. Ahem, why do I suddenly feel like I'm starting high school? Then, passing a field of knee-high weeds, Barry noticed a strong, mysterious blue glow coming from the window of an abandoned house. He slammed on the brakes and peered toward the light. Inside the ruined place, two figures stood beside a strange 2-meter-tall cylindrical machine which pulsed with that blue aura. Joy bloomed on their faces at the device's apparent success. Father, it worked! With this, our people can overthrow him. The man composed himself quickly, a sadness shadowing his features. It's not that simple. Two aliens? Their hair was green, their faces largely human, but with pointed ears, hollowed cheeks, and pronounced brow ridges, clearly not human. They looked worn and harried, like fugitives who'd spent a long time on the run. After seeing Overman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, knowing there were Amazons and Atlanteans on Earth, Barry still hesitated on their origin. The girl suddenly turned and fixed him with a look. Her face snapped into alarm. She pressed her fingers to her temples, about to launch a psychic attack. "Father, someone's outside. Despero sent hunters." "Wait, Solana, he's human. I can read his thoughts right now." The man's hand shot out to stop her. Barry caught the couple's exchange and flashed into the house in an instant. "Are you in trouble? Maybe I can help." "My name is Jason," the man said, suddenly weary, prematurely weathered by suffering. "We're not from your planet," he explained, voice tight with memory. "We come from a world called Kalanor. A tyrant named Despero seized power and enslaved us. I was a scientist there. I was working on an energy interference device. It can, to some extent, scramble weapons that rely on energy." He gestured toward the machine. Barry understood. If the device worked, it could render energy weapons useless, potentially neutralizing a huge portion of Despero's arsenal. Once it's finished, Despero's energy weapons would be ineffective. Then our people could fight back. Jason's shoulders slumped. "I don't know if we'll be able to succeed." Barry tried to think of help they could bring. "Maybe the Green Lanterns? Hal Jordan, Green Lantern Corps?" Jason shook his head. "Despero is one of our own species. This isn't an invasion by another race. It's not something the Corps would automatically take on, and they might not be able to stop him anyway." Even the Green Lantern Corps? Barry felt his heart skip. How powerful was this Despero if Jason truly believed the Corps couldn't touch him? The thought of an enemy beyond the Corps' jurisdiction sent Barry's mind to the League and to his most powerful teammate, Overman. Could Overman stop him? Jason's expression went flat. Despero is ambitious. Kalanor may be only the first world he conquers. If he isn't stopped, he'll enslave more civilizations. Maybe then the Green Lantern Corps would act. The thought was desperate and ugly, and Jason lowered his eyes, ashamed of it. Barry's mind raced. Superman might be the best to ask. Maybe Superman could help. At that same moment, above Earth and unnoticed by anyone below, a majestic, dark red warship slipped silently into orbit. Chapter 184, I Will Bring Despair to the Justice 4K3. That's strange. Why isn't the Flash here yet? In the Justice League Hall, tall pillars held up a high roof, and the polished floors gleamed. The hall felt formal and imposing. It was the day to welcome new members, and Aquaman peered toward the entrance with a puzzled frown. All the recruits had arrived, so why was Flash, usually the fastest of them, late on such an important day? Maybe something delayed him, Firestorm offered, scratching at his flaming hair. He was one of the new members joining today. Batman said something quietly to the others, then stepped forward and addressed the three waiting recruits with measured solemnity. "On behalf of the League, welcome." Clark and Diana smiled and reached out their hands. "Thank you. We didn't expect to actually join," Firestorm and the woman called Element Woman replied, modest and excited as they shook hands with the world-famous heroes. "We're still young, but we'll do our best." David lingered to the side, uninterested in ceremonial niceties, but when the two politely shook Batman's and Superman's hands, they immediately rushed over to him. "I'm Ronnie, Overman. I've liked you for a long time." Firestorm, clad in a red and yellow battlesuit, with a nucleus-like emblem on his chest, spoke with the breathless enthusiasm of a college student meeting a hero. He shook David's hand like a fan at an Idol's signing. "What do you mean it's embarrassing? This is the most powerful superhero on Earth. Nobody can stay calm seeing him up close." He babbled and then, suddenly ashamed of himself, muttered an apology. "Sorry, you might not realize this, but there's another person in my head. He's the source of my powers." "That's all right, I know," David said with a smile. Firestorm was a fusion of teenage Ronnie Raymond and university professor Martin Stein. An accident at a nuclear reactor joined them, granting overwhelming power, strength beyond human limits, and the ability to decompose and rearrange matter at an atomic level. Ronnie controlled the body, while Stein existed in his consciousness, appearing beside him in Ronnie's mind to guide him. David suspected it had been Stein speaking moments ago. The potential in Firestorm's power was staggering. With a gesture, he could turn steel to water or graphite to gold. If developed fully, his ability to reshape organic matter might even reach godlike levels, though in practice he had yet to show the absolute limits of his power. "You know me, Overman? You actually looked at my file?" Ronnie's excitement made Stein's presence in his head seem almost bashful. "And me, it's my turn." Element Woman pushed through. cheeks flushed as she squeezed past Ronnie. Everything feels like a dream. I'm Element Woman. David shook her hand politely. Her skin was a little rough. Firestorm's flaming head already made him unusual. Element Woman was stranger still. She wore a white battlesuit, her pink hair glittered, and her eyes were crystalline. But from the neck down, she was a patchwork of elements. One arm was brown soil, the other gray stone. Her torso fused these materials. One leg was normal human flesh, the other a wooden limb. After a chemical accident, I developed my abilities, she explained, curling her fingers in embarrassment. At first, I couldn't control it. I could barely restore one leg in my head. Where there's one, there can be two, David said kindly. With practice, you should be able to regain more control. There's every chance you'll get back to your original form. Element Woman brightened at the reassurance. Nobody in the League looked at her oddly, and the small kindness from a man who'd saved the world several times warmed her. Hello, said the last new member. They call me Hawk Girl. Hawk Girl was composed and calm, golden hawk wings unfurled from her back, and she wore a hawk-winged helmet that revealed only half her face. She extended a gleaming golden mace to David. Firestorm and Element Woman were among the few who didn't hide their faces. Firestorm because of his fused appearance, Element Woman because she couldn't. So Batman and Cyborg had chosen not to dig into all the applicants' secret lives, which had given Hawkgirl an opening. David smiled and tapped the nth metal mace in her hand with his finger. Hawkgirl's fingers tightened around the handle. She felt as if the man in front of her could see straight through her. His compliment about her weapon had a weight to it that made her uneasy. Still, she kept her composure. Thank you. Across galaxies, on the bridge of a crimson battleship, a towering figure watched a blue and green marble revolve on a holo display. He stood with his hands behind his back like an emperor surveying a province. So Jason escaped to this planet? One of the officers reported. Despero, genetic mutant and supreme ruler of Kalanor, had 3 eyes on his forehead and demonic fins along his head. He listened coldly. The ship's crew quickly displayed the signal they'd tracked. It led to a backward world the Kalanorians had labeled weak. Despero closed his eyes and extended his psychic senses. He was a predator in thought, and the rebel scientist he'd hunted for 3 years was easy to find. He also watched, through those same psychic tendrils, an Earth native called Flash interacting with the fugitive father and daughter. The League, the local resistance that could trouble his plans, was there too, most notably Overman and Superman. No one can help you, foolish rebels, he murmured, opening his eyes with contempt. He was bored with Kalanor as the only world under his heel. Rebellions were dwindling. It was time to expand. Let this planet, Earth, become the next world under my rule. He pictured it in his mind. The Justice League headquarters breached, the Flash bringing the rebels back full of hope, only to find their comrades slaughtered and the power they begged for broken by his hand. The despair on their faces, those moments of utter collapse, enthralled him. Having been cast out as an oddity all his life, he relished making others bow before him. First, we'll go to the Justice League headquarters. If the Flash takes them back there, he'll have the perfect audience. Back inside the hall, the new members mingled. You can turn stone into gold just by thinking about it? Hal Jordan was incredulous, grinning at Firestorm. Pretty much. I can change things into whatever substance I want, Ronnie said, ignoring Stein's mental scolding about bragging. Stein, the scholar of atomic structures, helped him understand how. Looks like we gained another rich guy, Hal joked, glancing toward Batman at the far end of the room. He'd never forgiven Batman for using wealth and cunning to wield power far beyond ordinary means. David's earlier demonstration, making a ridiculous amount of gold and hurling it into Metropolis, had stunned Hal. Now another person who could make wealth appear out of thin air had joined their ranks. Batman simply ignored Hal's jibe, and Green Lantern huffed and pushed a curl of hair back from his forehead. By the way, does Overman have the same trick as me? Firestorm asked quietly, eyes flicking to David on a distant sofa chatting with Clark. Last time he made that gold nugget, it shook the whole world. Hal shrugged. Who knows? He's got a lot of abilities. Arthur Curry shrugged. And let's not forget his other powers, super strength, absorbing kinetic energy, manipulating gravity, generating lightning, growing huge. Who knows what else might show up? In fact, the giant form was simply a manipulation of mass through gravity control, but no one present understood all of David's subtleties. Something in the room shifted as Clark tapped his communicator. I sent Flash a message. He hasn't replied. Everyone's expression changed. Superheroes had civilian lives. Barry Allen worked at the police evidence lab and sometimes took longer than expected to reply. But with his speed, he usually answered quickly. Either he didn't see the message, David said, lips pressed together, or something happened. Before they could puzzle it out, a deep voice echoed from the entrance. Justice League, recruiting new members? I don't see the need for that at all. A regiment of alien guards in red uniforms marched in a rigid line. The tall figure at their head stopped, crossing his arms and surveying the hall like a king scoping his domain. His presence was oppressive. After today, the Justice League will cease to exist, he declared. The room froze. Hal Jordan sprang forward, anger flashing. What did you say? Batman studied the intruder with cold eyes, demonic skin, a third eye. Was this an ancient fiend unsealed? David rose with Clark, and as the newcomer turned, David's gaze locked on him. He looked familiar in a terrible way. Despero's eye fixed on David. His voice was deliberate, as if pronouncing fate itself. You are Overman? You are Overman? David echoed, assessment in his tone. Despero smiled without warmth. I will bring you despair, end the Justice League, and as the sole deity, rule this planet. Hearing Despero declare his intent to destroy the Justice League, everyone in the hall went grim. The monster before them, huge and muscular like a small mountain, radiated a malevolence that made the air hard to breathe. Beside him stood an elite guard squad in cold formation, their energy weapons glittering. They looked formidable. How did you find this place? Batman asked, treating him like a mortal threat, one hand already reaching for the bat shurikens at his waist. The League had faced countless villains over the years. Apart from threats David had helped eliminate, none of them had ever tracked the League's headquarters down. Even the newest members had only been told the location that morning. Had Cyborg leaked the coordinates when he sent out the message? Not me. Not me either, Firestorm and Element Woman said quickly, waving off the suspicion. Hawkgirl frowned, tightening her grip on her mace. It was her first day in the League, and being implicated made her bristle. Your weak minds are open books to me, Despero said, his voice cold. Before me, you have no secrets. David narrowed his eyes. Only when Despero's third eye passed over Clark did the invader smile and point at Batman. Including the identity you desperately try to hide, an earthling named Bruce Wayne. Batman's expression beneath his cowl tightened. A cold, dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. Bruce Wayne? The billionaire playboy from Gotham. Everyone but David and Clark reacted with shocked disbelief. The dark, brooding Batman, the man who rarely smiled, really was that frivolous public figure? With the Batmobile, Batwing, and Fenrir armor, Despero continued, who else in Gotham could afford such toys? Hal Jordan's eyelids twitched, and he hurriedly activated his mental defenses. Of course, it's logical, but I never thought of it. Overman, Superman, you knew already? Cyborg asked, eyes on Despero. Damn it, Hal muttered with mock indignation. I figured someone with X-ray vision would have peeked into everything. No, Clark started, but before he could finish, Batman, his secret exposed and his face grim, launched an attack, hurling a razor-sharp bat shuriken at Despero's face. Despero caught it casually and raised a brow, about to mock the slow attack. The shuriken erupted into thick, noxious smoke, stinging eyes and lungs. Despero coughed. Attack! Batman growled and activated a wrist device to call in the Fenrir armor. Since his fight with the psionic pirate, he'd added remote control capability to the suit. Good opportunity. Taste my nuclear flames. Firestorm flung up columns of blistering fire. Element Woman used the obscured vision to sweep low with a leg that turned into a long, thorny vine. Hal's lantern ring flared into a green fist that whistled through the air. Cyborg's arm shifted into an ultrasonic cannon. Arthur leaped and hurled his trident. Everyone struck at once. The smoke was cleared by a wave of fire, and all the strikes landed, but Despero stood unscathed. Element Woman's vine felt like hitting twin alloy pillars. It didn't budge him an inch. Green Lantern's fist shattered against an invisible wall. Cyborg's ultrasonic blast and Firestorm's nuclear fire simply dissipated when they hit his chest. "Here, take that back!" Despero snatched Arthur's trident back with a backhand and sent it hurtling even faster than it had arrived. Arthur flinched, certain he couldn't dodge in time, until a figure flashed before him and caught the trident's blazing tip as it rushed in like lightning. "Be careful." David handed the trident back and warned everyone. "Too weak. Is this the Justice League the natives of this planet expect to save them?" Everyone froze. Clark felt stunned. If he'd been standing there, he couldn't have blocked so many attacks so casually. Only David's face remained calm. "Despero," he said, "is one of the most powerful and dangerous foes the League has faced." He knew exactly what Despero could do. He's got strength comparable to Superman's and has beaten him several times. His mental powers rival Martian Manhunter's, perhaps exceed them. Once he forced Martian Manhunter to use his most devastating power, a one-time illusion, to trap Despero in a false world where he believed he'd destroyed the Justice League. That's how Martian Manhunter saved everyone. "You little insect," Despero said, glancing at Batman with contempt. The third eye flared. A hammering psychic blow smashed through Batman's skull. He screamed, blood welling from his nose, and collapsed, unconscious. David's face darkened. He could catch a physical trident, but a mental onslaught was different. "Batman!" Hal lunged in fury and fired a missile. Despero plucked the missile's smoking tail, redirected it, and sent it straight up. It shuttered the League's dome to pieces. Dust and debris filled the hall. Despero raised a hand, and his guard fired laser beams that pulverized marble where they struck. Hal and the others scrambled. Clark flashed and dropped in front of the fallen Batman, using his body to shield him from the laser fire. "You want to conquer this planet? You're not nearly enough," Clark yelled. David hovered inches off the floor. His eyes unleashed savage cosmic rays. Despero raised his arms to block, pushed back by the force. His boots dug deep furrows in the marble. The guards lifted their weapons to strike David, but Diana twirled her lasso of truth and sent a wave of guards crashing into the walls. They staggered up, furious. "Combined attack!" Despero's guard squad pooled their psychic power and struck Diana with a mental blow. She staggered back, rocked but not defeated. Her mental defenses were formidable. These Kalanorian guards had been culled from the strongest of their race, yet even together they couldn't crack her quickly. Despero dodged David's beams. The energy carved a molten track through the marble, sulfur stinging the air. Despite his size, Despero moved with near-instant speed. He flashed into the air and hurled a punch aimed at David's head. "Since I awakened my powers, I've gotten everything I wanted. Conquering this planet will be no exception." David met the blow with a punch of his own. The clash produced a shockwave like a fuel-air blast, and a white, dense air current slammed everyone against the walls. The guards at the entrance were blown clear. Hal slid down a wall and groaned. It felt like his bones might shatter. Both combatants were sent flying from the center. David skidded backward more than 10 meters, righted himself in midair, and steadied. Despero, meanwhile, blasted through the hall's main doors with such force that he smashed through the cliff face beyond, his momentum carrying him hundreds of meters until he plummeted over the sea cliff. Despero steadied himself above the water and then looked back to the hall, rubbing an aching fist. He could fly. The League members streamed out. The hall had become a poor arena against an opponent like this. "You're stronger than I expected, Overmen," Despero said coolly. "Flash?" Hal demanded, clutching his chest. "What did you do to him?" He was thinking the worst, that Barry had been captured and tortured for the location. "Calm down." Clark stood before Hal, wariness in his eyes. "This guy can force David to fall back in a straight fight. Be careful." Despero sneered at the assembled heroes. "You are all useless trash." The dozen Kalanorian guards who had scrambled to their feet writhed and then collapsed. The flood of mental energy had melted their minds. The sight made everyone blanch. "They're your subordinates, you monster," Clark said, horrified. "I don't tolerate useless subordinates," Despero replied, eyes cold. "They saw how pathetic you are." David smiled in derision and wrenched the gravity. A column of seawater rose behind Despero like a dark blue curtain connecting sea and sky. Despero squinted as tens of millions of tons of water crashed down and shattered the cliff below. He roared, punching through the tsunami and appearing in the sky, looking down at David. Your strength exceeds my expectations, Overman. I underestimated you. Diana's brow tightened. Since arriving, Despero had been fixated on David, speaking to him as if no one else existed. Hawkgirl exploded skyward with a fierce flap of her wings and swung her mace at Despero's head. Diana leapt, cutting with the Godkiller's sword. Despero caught Hawkgirl's mace handle with one hand as the terrible weapon slammed down. He stood immovable, a mountain in the air. Hawkgirl strained, then Despero flicked his wrist like a bully tossing a child and launched her aside, snatching her nth metal warhammer and hurling it. The mace screamed through the air and slammed toward Diana. She raised her sword to block, the impact sending her flying in a spray of wind and metal. I need the strongest element you can think of, Professor. This is my first day in the League, Element Woman gasped, and Firestorm rocketed upward to help. With Professor Martenstein's guidance in his mind, Firestorm reshaped the thin air into a set of high-density alloy shackles and wrapped them around Despero. Element Woman shifted her legs into rolling earth, blasting herself into the sky, and then hardened her body to the highest density rock she could, striking like a meteor. Too weak, Despero said, and with a casual motion, the metal cage twisted and tore. He punched Element Woman's incoming fist and obliterated her arm in a spray of shattered stone. She screamed and tumbled to the ground, clutching the wound. Diana, who had just hit the deck herself, snatched her lasso and caught Element Woman before she hit the floor, eyes blazing at Despero. The others stared in shock. This newcomer might have lost an arm on her first mission. I can absorb elements and restore my body, Element Woman said, pale but defiant as she steadied in Diana's support. I'm fine. Firestorm answered from the sky, burning. Despero raised a hand and unleashed a psychic shock that hit both Firestorm and Element Woman. Their minds reeled as if torn in half. Firestorm split into two figures, Ronnie Raymond and Professor Stein, both collapsing in flames and unconscious. Clark, furious and protective, grabbed the two and fired his heat vision at Despero. Despero barely bothered to dodge. Boring. You are all too weak, he said. His third eye flared, sending an invisible psychic shock out like a blade. Clark's eyes rolled back, and he went limp, falling from the sky. Superman! Someone cried as Green Lantern conjured a huge glove to catch him. Everyone reeled at how easily Despero had taken down Superman. They watched, stunned, as Despero's contemptuous applause filled the air. He stepped forward, mock clapping slowly, his gaze fixed on David. Chapter 186, 50% Fusion, New Ability, 4K3. Despero hadn't come with an army. He killed his escort the moment they showed any sign of displeasing him. He didn't need soldiers. He trusted his own strength, the same strength that had conquered a whole world. His arrogance was as radiating as his power. Did you see his attack? He knocked Superman out. He had. The third eye on Despero's forehead had flared, and Superman had fallen unconscious in midair. The others, who had once scoffed at him, now drew back in fear. Their faces flushed with indignation, fists clenched, but none dared to act rashly. They formed a protective ring around the injured and unconscious, all eyes turning to David. You should have stayed on Kalanor, someone hissed. You shouldn't have come to Earth. David checked Clark quickly. No major brain damage, merely knocked out by a powerful mental shock, and his frown eased. He stepped forward slowly. Above them, the weather shifted. A roiling, inky sky and a fierce wind rose between earth and heavens. This world is not for you to meddle with, David said. Your arrogance will cost you your life. If Despero had stayed on Kalanor, David might have ignored him, even if he conquered 1,000 worlds. But Despero's ambition had turned to Earth. He aimed to make it another Kalanor, to fold its peoples under imperial rule backed by his divine will. That was intolerable. With a crack like a tearing sheet of metal, a bolt of lightning sheared through the clouds and struck Despero like a silver snake. For an attack that could vaporize steel, it only left smoke curling from his chest. He sneered. Your power is more than I expected, but I wonder how you measure up in other ways. Despero's pride wasn't his raw strength, though that was terrifying. It was his mental power. No mind could resist his will. He refocused on the job he'd been interrupted from. The third eye gleamed, condensing a brutal mental shock and slamming it into David's skull. For a moment, it felt as if his skull had no barrier at all. David's head snapped back. He gripped his aching temple, shook it off, and met Despero's stare with cold eyes. A good attack. No one has ever made me feel pain from a psychic strike. Lightning and a purple aura burst from David's gaze, blasting Despero away. He launched himself like a fired cannon, fist cocked. Let's see how many of my blows you can take. Despero's advantage was clear. He could crush minds. David's advantage was clear. He had fists. Each could hurt the other in different ways. We'll see if I can shatter your mind first, or if I can destroy your body, Despero snarled. They tore into each other in midair. Their movements blurred into streaks too fast for the eye. Airwaves cracked, the sea boiled and rose in towering swells. Despero poured malice and psychic pressure at David, attempting to hallucinate and unmake him. But mental invasion isn't instantaneous. It's a craft that takes time to shape. A hook punch meant like a colliding meteor smashed into Despero's jaw, brutally disrupting the assault and sending him spinning. Less talk, Despero. Concentrate, David mocked. He dove through cloud and spray, gathering 10,000 bolts of lightning into a blinding ball and driving it into Despero's chest. The Kalanorian plunged into the sea. Without relying solely on psychic attacks, David forced the fight into a contest of pure force. Island-sinking blows, each one enough to fracture continents. Despero, meanwhile, tried to both pound David physically and invade his mind, two tasks at once. The result was always the same. Neither was done well. David's mental defenses were not like those of a Kalanor native, who could have their skulls shattered by a single glance, nor like Superman, who crumpled under one of Despero's shocks. David was the strongest mind Despero had encountered. He could disrupt David's attacks, but each time he tried to hammer into David's head, David's barrage of blows interrupted him. And when Despero did press a psychic assault into David, David's movements slurred for an instant, yet he recovered. And then Despero noticed something that made his blood run cold. David's mental resistance was growing. The third eye flared and sent another invisible ray darting into David's mind. David simply shook his head and charged on as if nothing had happened. "Why is your mental defense getting stronger?" Despero gritted out, his face a mask of disbelief as he blocked blow after blow. He was being treated like a sandbag. He kept firing psychic shocks, like cannonballs, trying to blast through what seemed an ever-reinforced bunker. Each strike produced tremors and falling dust, but no real breach. David answered with a punch that numbed Despero's arm and nearly knocked away his guard. Template fuse 51. When the Hyperion template broke 50%, something unlocked. It wasn't a wholly new power. Hyperion Eternals were born to absorb and shape cosmic energy, but David suddenly remembered an ancient, simple lesson. Eternals learned, from their first breath, to manipulate the energy within them and to amplify themselves with it. The advanced application, channeling cosmic energy to boost strength, defense, recovery, stamina, reflexes, even mental fortitude, was the long work of centuries. David hadn't learned it from Thanos' template. Thanos, being a different strain, hadn't taught him how to freely release energy, but Hyperion's template carried that heritage. It gave him the way to force his mind to grow stronger, if only clumsily and briefly. I've known nothing about psychic powers until 2 days ago, David thought. I still don't, really. But I learned how to amplify my mind using my inner energy, and just now, it worked. His lightning-wreathed fist smashed into Despero's chest, and the Kalanorian flew backward. Despero, stunned and enraged, threw a punch in return, but without the full force of his psychic domination, he could not match David's powered blows. He plunged into the sea like a meteor, creating a basin and sending a towering, circular wave rippling outward. He emerged, soaked and furious, his flesh now a crueler, spikier caricature of himself, and lunged once more. David walked on the sea's surface, drawing mass and momentum from the water. Drops hung weightless around him, then flowed together into a cloud-like surge he stepped upon. His body swelled with the borrowed mass. "You think only you can grow?" he called. Despero swelled too, his body bloating into something like a hill. But the increase in size didn't translate to enough strength to match David's newfound amplification. A single punch sent him careening farther than before. David chased him down with chains of lightning and struck again. Despero's ability to alter his size and muscle was potent, but David's mass-amplified offense was greater. "No, if this keeps up, I'll truly lose to this whelp," Despero hissed. He steadied in the air and unleashed the fullest psychic blast he'd used all night, the one he'd been saving. All three eyes bled with power, veins standing out on his forehead as he wound up a mental attack charged to the maximum. The invisible shock hit David mid-pursuit. For a heartbeat, David staggered, pain ripping like a hangover through his skull. He stopped. Despero smiled at what he thought was a decisive moment. Then, to his horror, David merely shook his head and came at him again. That last psychic assault had nearly drained Despero. The effort had been too much to repeat, and even at full force it had failed to devastate David's mind the way it did others. Wounded, Despero tried to recover, but David's fist caught him square in the face, splitting his lip, loosening teeth, and blurring his sight. As the Kalanorian went tumbling away, David's palm became a gravitational anchor. He dragged Despero back and seized his throat. In a single quiet command, Shazam! Divine lightning as thick as a water tank struck down from the sky. Despero screamed. His flesh smoked and blackened as burning marks laced across him. He fought, sending David flying, but lightning and the six gods' power surged through David, and Despero crumpled under the barrage. He was pummeled through the air like target practice. Each punch was a machine gun pellet. A final blow sent him hurtling into a small island and plummeting into a crater. He lay there, broken. Everyone watched, tense, as Despero struggled at the crater's bottom. His face was a ruin of blood and torn skin. Bones were clearly broken. Yet his wounds began to knit in grotesque spurts, spots of flesh visibly knitting back together. He tried to rise. "You have no chance," David said quietly as he descended. He grabbed Despero by the neck and hauled him up. "I will never die like this." Fear and fury warred in Despero's eyes. He recognized the looming inevitability. He who had spread despair might die here. But he would not go alone. If he could not crush David's mind, he would take the others with him. His look swept over the assembled heroes. To him, their mental resolve was a cluster of candles that could be snuffed. As Despero fixed them with that look, a suffocating pressure rushed at Green Lantern and the others. Their hairs stood on end, and instinctive terror pushed them back. "Be careful," someone shouted. David didn't need the warning. He saw what Despero meant to do. With iron resolve, he thrust 2 fingers into the third eye on Despero's forehead. Flesh tore, blood spattered. Despero screamed, pure animal pain, his mental attack dissolving into a raw howl. "My eye!" David plucked it from the socket. "What use are eyes to a dead man?" he said flatly, and tossed the bloody organ aside. He gripped Despero's head with both hands and unleashed a volley of energy laced with lightning through his gaze. The heat and power incinerated Despero's remaining eyes and then seared his brain. Despero's screams curdled into gurgles, his face contorted, hollowed sockets smoking black, brain matter drying and charring. When David released him, Despero's body slid lifelessly into the crater. The threat was extinguished. A collective, exhausted exhale swept through the group, relief so palpable it was almost a physical thing. A flash of lightning heralded another arrival. From across the water, the flash bolted to the island entrance, accompanied by a man and a young girl. "Who broke the door? Why is everyone outside?" he called, bewildered. When they turned and saw the dark red corpse at the bottom of the pit, the man's and the girl's eyes went wide in unison. That's Chapter 187, I Can Take You Back in Time, 4K4. Despero, on a whim, had imagined a cruel prank. Lure Flash back to the League's headquarters in terror, only for Flash to discover that the powerful teammates he begged for help had already been turned by Despero. In his fantasy, Despero would appear triumphant at the Justice League Hall, only to see Flash's hope collapse into despair. Reality, however, had a different outcome. Despero was not the puppet master he thought he was. He was beaten by one person. David had vaporized his brain with a single energy beam. Flash brought Jason and his daughter to the League and explained their situation, offering to take them to Superman for help. Desperate and out of options, Jason and Serana were grateful and followed him to the headquarters. But when they arrived, something stopped them in their tracks. The sight on the island was impossible to reconcile with the nightmare Flash had feared. The superhero's line of sight turned away from them as they approached. Jason would never forget that dark red figure, the tyrant who had brutally enslaved his people. That's Despero? Serana blurted. The conqueror who had struck terror into Kalanor lay on the ground. His corpse stared up with hollow, pitch-black eyes, stripped of the ferocity and cruelty he had once worn like armor. You killed him? Serana covered her mouth, unbelieving. Flash followed their gaze and stopped, stunned. Your tyrant from Kalanor? How could this be? He had rushed Jason and Serana to the League precisely because he feared Despero might follow them to Earth and threaten the planet. But here, in front of League headquarters, Despero was already dead. How did you kill him? Jason asked, incredulous. Despero's mental power had been said to be greater than 10,000 Kalanorians combined. Weapons that could level mountains had failed to harm him. Yet now his body was motionless. It was almost entirely one person's doing. Hal Jordan answered frankly. Others stepped aside and revealed David standing over Despero's body. If it weren't for Overman, Firestorm and I might not be standing here now, Element Woman said, gratitude and lingering fear on her face. She had felt Despero's power firsthand. A single blow had shattered her defenses. Even Arthur and the others admitted their attacks had had no effect. This Despero was one of the most powerful enemies we've faced since the League was founded, until Overman showed up, someone added. Jason and Serana stared at David with dumbfounded mouths. This technologically backward world had produced someone who could put down Despero? Hawkgirl, who knew better than most what Despero could do, looked at David with a new mix of suspicion and awe. If a planet could be defended by such a person, did Thanagar really need to intervene? David's gaze returned to Despero's head. Although his body looks destroyed, his tissue is regenerating. He isn't fully dead yet. He cut his eyes back to the two Kalanorians. Are you Kalanorians? As he spoke the question, everyone present stared at Jason and Serana. Panic washed over them. In the original course of events, a Kalanorian father and daughter had fled to Earth, drawing Despero across the stars. His presence on Earth had then driven him to expand his ambitions. Flash had brought that pair to the League for help and had discovered the team under Despero's control. That chain of events had nearly destroyed the League. If Despero hadn't wanted to toy with Flash and had instead kept everyone under his influence, the outcome might have been worse. No, it's not like that. Though David's face betrayed no coldness, Jason and Serana scrambled to explain, terrified. The man standing before them radiated a lethality they could barely comprehend. We only fled to Earth to escape and to buy time for my research. We never meant to lure him here. David raised an eyebrow. Research? Jason seized the chance. Yes, I'll give you the energy interference technology I've been working on. As an apology. He bowed his head. They had, after all, brought a dangerous enemy halfway across the galaxy. Despero had probably followed them out of boredom or obsession, and upon seeing Earth, a living planet, decided it was worth conquering. Whatever the motive, his death here was accidental. David, who had at first suspected the scientist's research had guided Despero to Earth, revised his view after listening. Jason's technology was far beyond Earth's, but it wasn't world-ending. Despero's arrival had been driven by his own whims and reports of the rebels' movements. In any case, it didn't matter. Despero's regeneration had only just begun, and David opened a gravitational tunnel between Earth and the Sun, slinging Despero's body into space. Friction with the atmosphere ignited him, and in moments he was hurled into the Sun's interior, burned so thoroughly that not a molecule remained. I don't particularly need your technology, David said matter-of-factly, but I won't just let you abandon the mess you brought without recompense. He accepted Jason's offered research. The day had been meant to be one of welcome for new League members. Instead, someone had nearly killed them all. Among the casualties, Ronnie Raymond and Professor Martin Stein had been separated by Despero's attack. When they woke, Professor Stein had briefly rejoiced at regaining his own mind, only for both their bodies to show instability. Cyborg's examination and Stein's own analysis revealed that the nuclear reactor explosion had permanently altered them. They could only exist by merging. If kept apart too long, their bodies destabilized. Forced by the circumstances, Professor Stein merged again with Ronnie, becoming Firestorm once more. With Firestorm's matter-transforming powers and Element Woman's help, the entrance and dome of the League Hall were repaired quickly. Firestorm reshaped matter to renovate and reinforce much of the headquarters. At least now we won't have to worry about enemies arriving on our doorstep, Firestorm said, clapping his hands as if dusting them off. With Overman here, who needs to fear anybody? Overman is only at headquarters today because of the incoming guests, Hal explained, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed, now relaxed. He isn't usually around. What? I need to get his autograph. Firestorm's eyes lit up and he bounded into the hall. I want one too, Element Woman chimed, and the two dashed inside, arguing good-naturedly. Kara Zor-El. The voice called from the darkness. Wake up! Who's there? Kara, who had been napping, opened her eyes. She wasn't in the cozy attic that David and Clark had set up for her. Around her stretched an endless sea of fire. Where am I? She spun, disoriented. She remembered being at her cousin's adoptive parents' house. Was it a dream? Another vision of Krypton's lava falls? This did not feel like a dream. You are not dreaming. This is not Krypton. Krypton is gone. The voice answered, carrying a loneliness that seemed to echo from the depths of a cold, empty universe. Kara turned and saw a figure appear behind her. He was pale, his skin somehow metallic, as if forged from white dwarf matter. His eyes were ink black, lacking the whites, and he wore the remnants of a battlesuit, red and blue half buried on his lower body. The figure's presence radiated indifference and solitude. Don't be afraid, Kara Zor-El. I am El. I am also, like you, the last of Krypton. Kara sprang fully to attention, defensive. Who are you? What have you done to me? I brought you to the surface of Earth's sun. Hell spread his arms as if to let her look around. The blazing outline of the sun loomed in the distance. I've wanted to speak with you for days, away from your cousin and that Earthling. It's not been easy to separate you. His gaze swept back to Earth. His vision seemed to take in the universe itself. Far below, he'd seen the last son of their house saving people in Metropolis, and another Earthling flying toward the Arctic for reasons Hell could not yet understand. You say you're Kryptonian? Kara's body tensed. His words sounded rehearsed, and she felt the prickling of suspicion. The sun's light should be empowering her, and yet something about Hell's presence made her uneasy. Hell continued in a calm, almost tired voice. I drifted through the cosmos for decades. I bathed in the light of yellow stars and blue stars, quasars, white dwarfs, neutron stars, supergiants. The journey changed my body and gave me abilities most Kryptonians don't have. Like spatial teleportation and telepathy, he added earnestly. Kara's skepticism didn't ease. Yellow sun energy unlocked Kryptonians and blue suns could do even more. Exposure to many kinds of stellar light might change someone, maybe even grant odd powers, but Hell's sudden appearance and strange looks made her distrust him. She tried to leave. I assure you, I mean you no harm. Hell touched his chest, trying to show sincerity. I have ties to your family. I was a student of Jor-El. Kara froze. What? You are not the only one Jor-El taught. I was like a son to him, Hell said. Before Krypton exploded, he sent me away as well, on a ship meant to preserve Kryptonian culture and knowledge. Kara frowned. She and Clark had both escaped Krypton on ships. How could this stranger know of Jor-El in such details? Her father Zor-El hadn't been close to his brother, and she had few memories of Jor-El's household. The claim rang hollow. You ask me to treat you like family, but I don't know you, she said coldly. Why should I trust you? Hell's loneliness was palpable. He seemed like someone who had drifted for decades without seeing another member of his species. Yet the suddenness of his arrival and the way he had kidnapped her to the sun made her fear him even more. I need your help, Kara. Hell caught up to her as she tried to fly back toward Earth. And I can help you. What are you talking about? Kara snapped, annoyed at being pursued and unable to shake this inexplicable man. She didn't want or need help. We can go home together. Hell's voice was quiet but resolute. Kara hovered, the weight of the words pressing on her. He was talking about home, Krypton before the explosion. Are you insane? She demanded. No, I can go back to the past and change our present reality, Hell replied, his eyes locking onto hers. But I need your help. Kara's breath hitched. She stared at him, stunned, then let out a small, incredulous sound. You mean time travel? You mean time travel? Kara's mouth fell open. For a moment, she let herself be swept away by the beautiful fantasy. Even on Krypton, with technologies unmatched in the universe, time travel sounded like a fairy tale. Time is the most terrible force, she said finally. It dries oceans into canyons and turns stars into cold black dwarfs. Kryptonian scientists said that if you could conquer time, you could conquer everything. If time travel were possible, nothing would be impossible. Saving Krypton would be easy. But how could you possibly do it? Kara instinctively stepped back as if she were facing an unpredictable madman. Hell watched the blue planet in the distance with calm eyes. You must think I've gone mad after drifting alone in the void, he said. But consider this, don't the people on that planet seem mad to you? They fly without machines and call it miraculous. To them, my kind of power would seem like superstition. In a way, I can be considered a super Kryptonian. He flexed his hands as if feeling the edges of something invisible. I can sense time like a thin membrane. I can see through it, but I don't yet have the energy to break through and jump. He waved his hand. The scene around them dissolved and reformed above a smoke-choked battlefield in the Middle East. Between ruined buildings, two groups of men crouched behind cover, trading gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit faces, twisted with hatred. Bullets tore flesh, blood sprayed, bones shattered. Look at this, Hell said quietly. Is this the world you recognize? These are your fellow people. Humans at their most desperate showed a ferocity that made Kara recoil. A masked man lobbed a Molotov cocktail. The fire exploded among the attackers, sending them screaming to the ground. Kill! The man shouted, a cruel rapture on his face as his companions surged forward. Kara's expression flinched between disgust and sorrow. Jor-El and your father sent you and your cousin to this solar system. The yellow sun gave you godlike power, but this world is not Krypton. It isn't home. With another gesture, they were gone, this time to a frozen white wasteland. The wind howled around them, and Kara blinked at the sudden cold. Hell's appearance had changed. Now he wore noble Kryptonian robes, his face handsome and pale, his eyes bright sapphire. The scholar's intelligence in his expression made him seem almost kindly, nothing like the gaunt, scarred man she had met earlier. This was my original face, he said. If I wanted, I could appear like this to gain your trust. He reached out and plucked a chunk of ice from a distant iceberg, staring at his own former harsher features with a flicker of sadness. His voice had shifted too, warming from the cold, lonely edge it had before. I don't even need to tell you. He tapped the air with 2 fingers. Suddenly, Kara found herself able to speak unfamiliar words, strange, complex syllables forming naturally on her tongue. What is this? She breathed. It's a language from one of the tribes in that battle, Hell said. I gave it to you in an instant. Kara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. Hell did not only possess strength and invulnerability, he could alter minds, implant memories. If he chose to deceive, he could do it with terrifying ease. Hell stepped closer. If there's even a chance to save Krypton, to save your parents from death, will you lay everything on the line to try, Kara Zor-El? Her jaw set. If there's a chance, yes. Hell watched her for a long moment. Kara Zor-El, will you help me go back and save Krypton? How could I help? She asked. The warmth she'd felt since being on Earth, the kindness of the couple who had raised her, made her hesitate. Those memories soothed the aching hole left by her parents' loss. Still, the thought of returning to them was irresistible. You will support me, Hell said simply. I have been adrift in the universe too long. When you are the only person among countless stars, the silence and darkness press on you until you fear you will break. I need someone to stand with me, to validate me. I had hoped Clark would join me. He is my closest kin, but I've watched him. He is different. Cousin? Why wouldn't he come? He has his father, his people. He hasn't even met his mother. Kara's voice rose with disbelief. She had intended to bring Hell to meet Kal-El and David. David, she was sure, would help. Hell shook his head with a coldness that cut through the wind. I have watched him long before you arrived. Kal-El's body is Kryptonian, but his spirit is shaped by Earth. You remember Krypton, every blade of grass, every tree. He never did. His affection for these humans far exceeds any bond to his true kin. Kara opened her mouth to argue, then remembered Zod's attempts to recreate Krypton and how David and Clark had stopped him. The couple who raised Clark had given him a life so absorbing that he might never choose to undo it. She could not deny that. Hel smiled as if satisfied. But you supporting me will be enough. Now, let's get what we need for time travel. What's the first thing? Hel's eyes brightened. The world engine Zod brought here. It can remake a planet. Inside it is a power crystal. Its energy is ocean-like. I need that energy. At the Fortress of Solitude, David had just handed Jor-El a crude energy interference device he had obtained from Kalanor and his daughter. He wanted Jor-El to appraise its scientific potential. Brainiac is a technological force to be reckoned with, Jor-El's hologram said, studying the device. The tech used on cyborg Superman, if repurposed, could raise massive mechanical armies. The energy interference design had power but lacked discrimination. It couldn't tell friend from foe. It's unconventional, Jor-El concluded, but promising. David planned to discuss contingencies if Brainiac ever unleashed such machines. He turned from the console, just as a flicker in his peripheral vision pulled at him. Kara? He murmured. Inside the mothership, buried beneath the ice at the North Pole, metal groaned. An invisible force tore into the vessel and ripped out the world engine like it were a toy. Hel hung in the air above the battlefield of bent and broken metal. He reached into the engine and plucked a glowing blue crystal from its core. The light inside it swirled like a nebula, Hel's face lit with a dangerous exhilaration. The crystal is mine. The first step toward the past is complete. Who are you? A voice called, cold and forceful. A figure hovered above the scene. David, eyes narrowed on Hel. The sight was impossible. David stood shirtless in the polar cold, where steel itself would fracture, his body unscathed. Hel had run his hand through the ship's hull as if opening a package. David's gaze hardened. This guy, Hel, believing no introduction necessary, spread his arms and smiled. Hel, he said proudly. David's eyes tightened at the name. He remembered the stories. Hel, the student of Jor-El, launched before Kal-El though the mission failed, stranded and exposed to cosmic radiations that changed him. When a guard robot buzzed forward, projecting Jor-El's holographic image in surprise, Hel's face twisted with contempt. You're not really my mentor, he snarled at the projection. Just a bundle of data pretending at feeling. Turning humans into electronic life is an abomination. Krypton forbade it. He reached out. With a flick of telekinetic force, he sent the guard robot crashing into the snow, its projections sputtering and distorting. Hel, what are you doing? That's Uncle Jor-El! Kara cried. Hel's disdain was palpable. A simulation. Repulsive. An energy bolt lanced from David's chest, striking Hel and blasting him back. The purple glow in David's eyes flared. An old sensation of being watched, of being challenged, returned to him. Memories pieced together at once. Hel's pale face, his scars, the rumors of his exposure to quasar radiation, and the powers that followed. Hel had come to Earth to recruit Kal-El to a terrifying plan. Gather Kryptonian energy crystals, build an absorptive device to siphon the sun, and use that colossal energy to tear a hole through time. David steadied himself, watching Hel rise again, the blue crystal clutched in his hand and the Arctic wind carrying the sound of coming conflict. Chapter 189. Battle over the North Pole. The world engine taken from Zod had been destroyed. David and Hel clashed the moment they met. Jor-El assessed the situation and immediately alerted Clark, who was thousands of miles away. Father's student? Stealing an energy crystal? Above Metropolis, Clark, fresh from stopping a jewelry store robbery, felt his Green Lantern ring vibrate and saw the message. Under the cheers of the crowd below, he pierced the sound barrier again and again as he rushed for the North Pole. I've been watching my mentor's student, Hel, to see if he could possibly help save Krypton, he told himself. Hel staggered after taking a blast of cosmic energy, then steadied himself. He showed no visible injury, only a grim, cold look. He's forgotten who he is, Hel snarled. He's drunk on your false, bloodless adulation, smug under the worship of Earthlings. He betrays Krypton. He opened his palm and a Kryptonian energy crystal, an intricate cluster that looked almost grown rather than forged, levitated above it. No bloodline? False affection? So you know what real love looks like? David's laugh was icy. Beyond physical traits that exceeded those of ordinary Kryptonians, Hel possessed teleportation, telepathy, and telekinesis. You must have had a very deep bond with your biological parents then. You're asking for death. The words hit a raw nerve. Hell, a rare orphan on Krypton, had never met his birth parents. The only kindness he had known had come from Jor-El and his wife. He loved them deeply and called them father and mother. Wait, Hell, we don't have to fight, Kara said, stepping between them. She turned to David and pleaded, sincere. We need this crystal to save Krypton. It doesn't matter to you and Clark. Let us take it. This is Kryptonian property, not theirs, Hell said coldly. Kara, don't waste breath on him. Light flared in Hell's eyes like twin miniature suns. Kal-El had been Jor-El and Lara's son, yet Hell believed Kal-El had failed to honor that bond. He blamed David and Kal-El's parents for it. Impossible. You will not take it. David refused outright. Though only a few days had passed since they'd first met, Kara had seen enough to know David wasn't petty. He hadn't cared about the world engine earlier. He and Clark had left it at the pole without concern, which made his sudden reaction all the more surprising. Why? She asked. It's useless to me, but I won't let it be useful to him. David's eyes flashed purple and lashed out at the crystal. An invisible field blocked the beam, rippling in the air. Hell had already erected a telekinetic shield around the crystal. This affects a plan to restore Krypton. Did you think I wouldn't be prepared? I decided, before I moved to save Krypton and travel back in time, to teach you a lesson first, he warned. In a blur of motion, he slipped past Kara, appeared in front of David, and raised a fist. Earthling, you seem to have forgotten your place in the universe, daring to treat Kryptonian property as your own. Buzz! Buzz! David's eyes showed no sign of alarm. The gravitational field around him shifted, and an oppressive force slammed into Hell, pinning him as if a mountain pressed down from all sides and stiffening his strike. Bang! A blue and red blur streaked in from a distance, carving a void through the wind and snow. Its fist slammed into Hell like a cannonball, sending him flying. You are Hell? Clark hovered, revealing himself. He exchanged a look with David, then turned his glare on Hell. You don't sound or look anything like my father's description. Intelligent, honest, stoic, reliable. He had seen the killing intent in Hell's face when he had thrown that first punch. It had been cold and bestial. Hell wiped his mouth, sneered at Clark, and spat. The father you call yours, is he just a data cluster to you? You disgust me, Kal-El. You don't deserve the name House of El. If you weren't Jor-El's student, I'd have killed you long ago, Clark replied. Hell, enough. Let's go, Kara said, panic briefly crossing her face. She felt guilty and couldn't meet Clark's eyes. If they changed the past, Clark would never have been sent to Earth. He wouldn't have had Jonathan and Martha, and he'd never have met his brother, David. As much as she revered Jor-El and Aunt Lara, she hadn't asked Clark if he wanted that life. She had wanted to see her parents again, but she knew she hadn't considered the consequences. I can leave the moment I get the crystal. I don't have to take it like a thief. Never. Hell rejected her. He had not yet taught David the lesson he intended. Clark's arrival only made him more eager. Kara, hold the crystal. Protect it. This is Krypton's only hope. He handed the crystal to Kara, then looked at David and Clark with a sneer. Come at me together, Overman, Superman, Earth's great so-called superheroes. Hell emphasized the titles with contempt. Clark, already furious at being declared undeserving of the House of El, surged forward with a punch as Kara slipped to the side, struggling visibly. Too slow, Hell taunted. Hell tilted his head and dodged with almost casual ease. The missed punch exploded the air and swept away snow in a wide arc. Clark stared. He hadn't seen Hell move before he swung, and yet the punch that had seemed certain simply passed harmlessly by as Hell stood there with folded arms. As Clark's fist came down, Hell somehow slipped the blow at a speed Clark couldn't track and countered. A repulsive force erupted from Clark, capable of shoving mountains, but Hell punched through it and struck Clark's abdomen, sending him hurtling back. David caught Clark mid-flight. Clark hit his knees on the frozen ground, coughing blood onto the ice, eyes wide with shock. I've never felt a hit like that, David muttered. Be careful, he's stronger than Zod. Hell was supposed to have been Jor-El's student. Why was he stronger than Krypton's military leader? David's face darkened. He steadied Clark and said nothing more, signaling him to breathe. Even a seasoned Superman would be at a disadvantage against the super Kryptonian Chell. Clark, newly come of age, was even more vulnerable. And yet Hell was stronger than any of them had expected. "Is it my turn?" Hell sneered. "I'm curious how many punches you can take." He floated with his arms crossed, radiating arrogant contempt. "Unlike Kal-El, you have no blood of the House of El, no right to be a Kryptonian. Killing you places no burden on me." "Say that when you can back it up," David replied. Purple light rippled over David's body, coalescing into a humanoid shimmer. He vanished and reappeared in front of Hell at blistering speed. Hell lifted a hand to block with a dismissive gesture, but the next instant his body jolted from a blow he'd misjudged. He had underestimated David. Hell's face changed, but more attacks came before he could recover. "You're not qualified to be arrogant around me," David said. As Hell half raised his hand, David's other fist slammed into his face. Hell was thrown backward. He regrouped in midair and saw an iron fist growing huge in his vision. He threw up a telekinetic barrier, one that could normally withstand a nuclear blast, but it shattered like glass under David's force. In the brief opening, Hell grabbed the fist, eyes locked on David's with surprise. "You've gotten stronger, just in these past few days. Do you think you know me?" David said, and shook free. His hand chopped through the sky, aimed for Hell's neck. Hell teleported away at once and unleashed thick heat vision into the sky. The intense heat began melting the perennial ice below. Water formed and then flashed into steam. David raised an arm to block, feeling searing pain as the blast seared his skin and threw him back, carving furrows in the frozen ground. A distant berg shattered and vaporized. David kept his expression steady and thrust back at Hell. Hell's strength was terrifying. His hits pierced multiple layers of defense, even David's energy manipulation that could absorb nuclear force. David sustained only burns. His arms bore angry scorch marks. "Why have you stopped showing off that inferior heat vision?" Hell jeered, proud of being born on Krypton and resentful of David's imitation. Their fists and feet collided, blasting airwaves that raked hundreds of miles. Sonic booms rent the North Pole sky. The wildlife looked up in terror and fled as if two colossal titans fought near enough to destroy the world. David landed a savage blow that snapped Hell's head back. "Your strength keeps growing." Hell rubbed his aching nose, glaring. His speed, too, had increased, nearly equal to his own. "You guessed right, but there's no prize." David's fists were lightning fast and planet-shattering in force. He pressed the attack without mercy, forcing Hell to abandon his arrogance and respond with full focus. A single mistake could mean a crushing blow. Template fusion. A few more days of fighting and Hyperion's template fusion had inched up. Although it hadn't granted David new powers outright, he'd grown more skilled at consuming cosmic energy to amplify himself. Like before when he faced Despero, this time he poured the vast cosmic reserves through himself to boost body, speed, strength, and reaction. On the ground, Superman and Kara watched from different vantage points, their faces tight with worry. The blasts and airwaves from the duel tore at the atmosphere and shattered icebergs. If either were caught in a direct strike, they might not survive a second. Clark's worry was for David. Kara's was for both David and Hell. She clutched her hands, eyes never leaving the battle. She wanted only to go home, and not at the cost of anyone's life. Both fighters possessed superminds. They learned combat almost instantly. Now the battle had become a raw collision of power and speed. "You are not my match. You don't know what I've endured." Hell roared, sending mountain-level blows at David like meteors. "If you truly believed that, you wouldn't say it like that," David replied and met the blow, countering with an elbow. They'd stopped trying to use telekinesis or gravity fields to slow each other. They were hammering each other with pure force, the sky full of crashing shockwaves. Even before acquiring the Hyperion template, David had vast cosmic energy within. Now being able to consume that energy as a direct amplifier was like turning a key. His power could exceed Hyperion's level. Burning cosmic flames flared along his aura. His power crept ever higher, steady and inexorable. Why is his strength still growing? Hell's eyes sharpened with real unease. David had the experience of a veteran warrior and the relentless momentum of someone who improved during battle. Hell felt like a wave threatening to drown him. Unease crept into the Kryptonian's heart. He couldn't help but worry that the tide was turning against him. Chapter 190, deadly as kryptonite radiation. 4K. No need. I'm not wasting any more time on him. David's power was building, steady and relentless, each blow like a tide of stone. Half his body tingled with the effort. Hell's eyes darted, calculating. The North Pole was buried in a blizzard. Ice fog filled the air and scattered the sunlight. In that light, he could not draw much from the yellow sun, and the unpredictable course of the fight made Hell break off and teleport away. This time, he didn't reappear to face David. He vanished beside Kara instead. "Do you remember someone said he wouldn't run like a thief?" he taunted. The man in front of David slipped away. David lowered his fist, shifting his gaze. "I've wasted too much time on meaningless people and things." A flash of ruthlessness crossed Hell's face as he sneered. "Don't think I didn't notice you looking at Kara several times during the fight. If you didn't know I could teleport, you would have attacked her long ago, wouldn't you?" The energy crystal had been the hinge. Hell's teleportation made no difference whether the crystal was on Kara or on him. David never found a clean opening to act. Your energy isn't infinite. Keep fighting, and you'll lose. Like a victor, Hell plucked the crystal from the air as it flew from Kara's hand. "I don't have time for this. If my plan to save Krypton fails, I'll regret it forever. Goodbye." Kara opened her mouth to say something to Clark and David, but no words came. In the next heartbeat, Hell and Kara were gone into the cold, barren sky. "Where did they go?" Clark asked, hand pressed to his stomach as he peered across the broken ice fields. Using supervision, he scanned the skies and the horizon but found no trace. "They're not on Earth, but they haven't left the solar system." David looked up into space, resolve hardening. He won't escape. Hell's goal was clear: to drain the sun's energy. "Before I came, I thought I heard him mutter something about traveling back in time to save Krypton," David said. Hell was unlike any foe they'd faced, enormously powerful, and David couldn't afford distraction. He finally had the chance to explain to Clark what he'd pieced together. "He wants to drain the sun to fuel time travel." Clark stared at him, stunned. The man who had just knocked him to the ground was a fanatic. Kara actually believed him? She agreed to this? She doesn't know he plans to drain the sun. David shook his head as he headed for the Kryptonian ship. She thought getting the crystal was enough. The crystal does hold an ocean of energy, but she didn't grasp how difficult time travel would be. She was blinded by the desire to save Krypton and see her parents again. "When you two were fighting, I asked Kara why she and Hell wanted the crystal," David continued. "She didn't answer, like she couldn't hear me." Clark's brow nodded. "Because Hell shielded her senses." David didn't try to argue with Kara while she had the crystal. Hell's telepathic reach was strong enough to skew her perceptions and memories. David was about to go inside the ship to ask Jor-El about the Kalanorian energy interference tech they'd salvaged, whether it could hamper Hell's energy-absorbing device, when voices cut through the wind. Cyborg and Green Lantern dropped from the sky, their descent tearing at the distant iceberg. The Batwing touched down and the rest of the League disembarked from the plane. "Cyborg picked up intense anomalies in the Arctic atmosphere," Batman said. "He remembered Overman, and you placed Zod's and Brainiac's ships here and suspected something had happened, so we came." They all stared when Clark lifted a hand and revealed blood at the corner of his mouth. When Clark explained that a Kryptonian named Hell had fought David to a stalemate and then teleported away, murmurs of alarm spread through the team. "Is Hell that powerful, stronger than Zod?" Batman's voice was tight. Even Overman had had trouble with him. Jor-El ran his hand over the schematics they produced. "That energy interference design is crude compared to what would be needed, but I can fabricate a device that will interfere with the energy extraction field. It will only delay the process, by seconds at most." "Even 1 second helps," David said, eyes hard. 1 more second would be 1 more chance to stop Hell. And if Hell succeeded, draining the sun, traveling back, and saving Krypton, history would change. Clark might never come to Earth. Clark's face went white at the thought. Then Jonathan and Martha would lose their son, David added quietly. For David it meant at most a setback in his own growth, but for Clark it meant losing a family. The team understood the stakes. "Without the sun, Earth is doomed," Arthur said, fingers wrapped tight around his trident. "I sympathize with his loss, but that doesn't justify annihilating the sun. Flash tightened his jaw. I'm heading back to Gotham. Batman took off almost immediately, piloting the Batwing into the sky. If there's not enough time, we'll rendezvous in space. Hal Jordan's usual levity was gone. If the sun went out, even his homeworld couldn't survive for long. Diana gripped the God-Killer's sword. Sunlight meant life. Plants, air, food. Cyborg spoke up, cautious. Time travel might just create another timeline instead of rewriting the original. David, who knew more about this universe than he let on, said what he could. Whatever the mechanics, we can't gamble with 6 billion lives. If Hell succeeds, we lose our Superman. Green Lantern's ring hummed at his side as he clenched his teeth. The team agreed. One enemy, one common cause. They had to stop him. They completed Jor-El's device, a small lantern-like gadget that glowed faintly blue. David picked it up and prepared for the jump to space. He had already guessed what Batman would do. Never trust even teammates completely. With Bruce Wayne's resources, there would be backup plans, and kryptonite was a likely contingency. David smiled in a private, almost rueful way. Everyone who couldn't survive unassisted in vacuum suited up in the spare Kryptonian battle armor. Clark stayed with David. Cyborg and Green Lantern piloted the craft launched from the mothership, punching through the Arctic atmosphere and into space. Mercury, David said over the comm, closest planet to the sun. Hell's most likely there. Let's go. Clark hesitated. Shouldn't we wait for Batman? He probably went to get a kryptonite solution. You figured it out, Clark? David asked with a mild surprise. Why wouldn't he? Clark said, relaxing slightly. The thought of a kryptonite contingency was comforting. It's not news that kryptonite works on Kryptonians, David replied. And Bruce is the kind of man who keeps contingencies. He carries a tiny vial of kryptonite solution on his utility belt sometimes. Clark blinked. I didn't know that. Lead-line belts can't block X-ray vision, but David understood Bruce's temperaments, preparedness above all. This isn't the first Kryptonian to try to destroy Earth. Hell is the third, David added as the craft accelerated. They were fast. The closer to the sun, the more a Kryptonian would be strengthened. David, however, wasn't Kryptonian. Even with amplification, Hell was a different problem. Clark's expression darkened. Does kryptonite work on him? David shook his head. Hell's exposure to celestial energies makes him highly resistant to ordinary kryptonite. It won't subdue him like it would a normal Kryptonian. The news hit Clark hard. The battle might be impossible, unless they found another way. David's lips curved. Resistance, yes, but not absolute immunity. Clark's hope flickered. Then what do we do? Radiation from kryptonite is what's lethal to you Kryptonians, David explained. They used the ring to form a gravitational slingshot and swing toward Mercury, accelerating their approach. It isn't only the mineral itself that can produce that kind of radiation. They rocketed through the inner system until Mercury's barren gray plains loomed. On the planet's thin, seared atmosphere, a ruined ship lay nearby, a towering crystalline pillar that stabbed into the sky like a sword. Hell and Kara stood beside it. This? Mercury? Kara asked after a quick check of the coordinates, eyes lingering toward the distant Earth with worry. Hell's hand hovered as he levitated the crystal into the heart of the device. The compartment opened, swallowing the crystal. With a hum, the mechanism came alive. Golden light pulsed down its length, and its tip flickered with terrifying energy. The light played across Hell's face, and he wore a look of rapture. Forget them, he said to Kara gently. Don't worry about Earth. Everything changes now. They won't be our concern. He blinked, rhapsodic. Drifting through the universe, facing death at every turn, I never dreamed a day like this could come. I will go back to Krypton and pull it from the edge. My mentor will be proud of me. The universe wanted Krypton gone, but I'll rewrite fate. I will be the greatest name in Kryptonian history. He clenched his fist, eyes burning with fervor. Kara watched him, something like suspicion shadowing her features. Is that why you came with me? She asked suddenly. What? Hell sounded taken aback. You haven't seemed lonely. I never saw you needing my help to get the crystal. If you go back and change the past, you'll be celebrated. Am I just here to be part of your legend? Kara's voice was quiet but sharp. Time travel, she thought, was a fantasy even on Krypton. If Hell truly could come from the future, his testimony would carry weight, especially if backed by the House of El. Would people believe a nameless rescuer, Or would the House of L's patronage be more convincing? If Hel could use the House of L's name to lock in his legend, he could prevent the Kryptonian Council from erasing his deeds. Kara's suspicions expanded until things felt wrong. Do you see me as nothing more than a witness or a tool to give you legitimacy? Hel's eyes went cold at that. The light from the device cast long, jittering shadows across his face as he listened to her. And this device. Kara's X-ray vision swept through the tall apparatus standing before them. Inside were too many components for energy storage and conversion, an architecture that didn't sit right with her. My father Zor-El, she said quietly, wasn't as celebrated as my uncle Jor-El, but he was a respected Kryptonian scientist. Suspicion sharpened in her features. She didn't just doubt Hel's motives for seeking her out. She suspected he had lied about the machine. All right, I admit it. The cold in Hel's eyes cracked into a smile as he pressed his palm down on the console. I wasn't honest earlier. The world engine's energy crystals alone won't power my temporal jump. I need to draw energy from this sun to make the time leap. Drain the sun? Kara took a step back, the color draining from her face. If you take the sun's energy, how will the lives in this system survive? Hel spread his hands in impatient dismissal. Why the dramatics? We're traveling through time. If we succeed in going back and saving Krypton, none of this will have happened. Are you 100% sure about that? Kara clenched her fists. If you succeed in time travel but deplete the sun's energy, what then? She had at first believed him. She had supported his plan to save Krypton because she thought the risk would be to them alone, perhaps the loss of a crystal, maybe a catastrophe that could be contained. But Hel was now willing to gamble billions of lives on his miracle. You're a Kryptonian, Kara Zor-El, she snapped, eyes blazing. You're not an Earthling. Do you forget that? Hel flared. We will not sacrifice an entire planet for this. He moved like a living catastrophe, sudden, brutal. Before she could strike the device, he intercepted her, slamming a palm into her midsection and sending her skidding back through the low gravity. His face was a hard, grim thing. What would you do? He demanded. Abandon Krypton for a planet of inferior insects? First Kal-El, now you. Kara stared, stunned. The ferocity in Hel was something she hadn't seen before, so different from the composed man who had first arrived. So that's the real you, she breathed. Yes, I deceived you and? Hel hovered like a predator, the shadow of his body falling across Kara. I offered you a chance to be the savior of our people, and you throw it away for Earth? His eyes narrowed, and a wave of psychic power washed over Kara. Her limbs went slack. She froze, pupils dilated, voice slipping into a hollow, repeated whisper. Home, home. Remember that, Hel said, cold and clinical. That will be enough for now. He could not instantly rewrite the core of Kara's memories. Telepathy could open doors, teach languages, nudge emotions, but to excise and perfectly replace pivotal memories required time. Still, he would alter what he could and finish the work later. It's a deviation from plan, he muttered, but not an insurmountable one. Hel lifted his hand. With telekinesis, he activated the device. A beam of light seared out from its tip and stabbed toward the scorching sun. It formed a luminous bridge that spanned from Mercury to the star, beginning to siphon solar energy. Once I drain this yellow sun, Hel murmured, eyes fixed on the radiance, I will have the power to break time. He did not care that David Kent and Clark Kent had come to interfere. This was the closest planet to the sun. The yellow light bathed him in raw, amplifying power. It felt intoxicating, an energy that promised to rend continents. A voice cut through the charged air. Hel turned. Using gravity's slingshot, two of them had arrived first. David and Clark hovered in the sky, fury on Clark's face. How could my father raise a madman like you? Clark spat. The light bridge already reached into the sun, drawing vast, visible currents of energy. You actually came to find me? Hel asked, folding his arms, amused. You will die for this, David said with a kind of flat resolve. Not all of us are helpless here. Hel's arrogance snapped back in place. Bold, it will be only you who dies today. He glanced up. A Kryptonian spaceship appeared, piloted by Cyborg. Amazing. Cyborg pushed the ship into the sky over Mercury, his face going pale at the sight of the light bridge. The team stared, Flash, Diana, Green Lantern, Aquaman, all feeling the raw, unnatural pull of energy. Even Zeus would have seemed small beside that sun. He's pulling energy from the sun, Cyborg said, voice tight. How do we stop it? Cut the beam? If we approached, the drawn energies would vaporize us, Flash warned. From their distance, they could feel the threat like a physical pressure. We have to hit the source. Hell reached for the Kryptonian ship. With telekinesis, he crunched it like a child squeezing tin. The hull groaned as fist-like grooves appeared across the outer skin. Alarm screamed. We're under attack, Cyborg barked as the ship's systems flickered. But before Hell could finish them, a thick purple energy bolt suddenly lanced through the sky, striking him square in the chest and blasting him back. He slammed into the device's protective shield and bounced off without a dent. Clark's lips tightened. You think a machine designed to drain a sun would have no defenses? Hell rose, pushed back by the shield and the blow. He sneered toward David, and telekinesis tried to strike. On Earth, you guarded your power. You avoided using it. Now, in a place disadvantageous to you, you squander it. Because it wasn't necessary, David said. He ripped free of Hell's attempted hold and launched himself like a missile. The two collided at superluminal speed, each hurling the other backward. Hell steadied after a few meters. David went flying dozens. Hell's grin was hard. Not necessary? David straightened, feeling the new gravity here sharpen him. Kryptonians are gifted by the yellow sun. Your strength is natural to you, but bloodlines carry both boon and burden. You can't take only the advantages. A light green glow pulsed from the ring on David's finger. Hell's eyes flicked to it. He had noticed the lantern ring earlier, but hadn't expected this. The most powerful weapon in the universe? Hell scoffed. It's nothing to me. As David surged forward and that green construct met him, Hell's calm broke. His body seized as if poisoned. His movements grew sluggish. He was blasted backward, coughing blood from his mouth as he fought to right himself. It's that stone from after Krypton exploded, he hissed. David's smile was quiet. Don't underestimate this ring. It manifests matter from energy, and those constructs carry properties. Simulate steel and it's as hard. Simulate fire and it burns. And simulate kryptonite, Clark added, stepping forward, and it radiates like the real thing. Hell's eyes widened in alarm. Against the amplification he'd built into his cheating device, simulated kryptonite would blunt him. David had, not physically, but in algorithmic knowledge, kryptonite's composition mapped as a solution inside his mind. He had taught the ring the properties and could project them. It was why he'd insisted on that ring from the Guardian. He could not always have imagined needing to do this, but now it mattered most. Don't underrate me, David warned. It's not too late to surrender. Between them, Kara slumped, the mental command holding her like a puppet. Clark roared, furious and helpless. You're going to murder billions, he cried. Hell's pupils contracted. Kara, the one he'd made guard the device, their only way home, had been reached. Clark, having received the kryptonite data from David, used the ring to simulate isolating radiation and to subdue Kara's aggression as he crossed toward the device. The light bridge trembled. The sun siphon faltered. Its beam wavered and shrank. The flow of energy slowed. Let's go, Clark said grimly, and with Cyborg's ship they surged toward the machine. Hell's face was a mask of fury. You won't destroy all of this, he snarled, sweeping outward to strike the others. If he could, he would slaughter them to finish his work. David stepped in, trading blow after blow with Hell in near vacuum. Each contact sent ripples through the airless space as if the world itself strained under their power. Hell's voice was fierce and fanatical. Krypton achieved greatness across the universe. A single petty planet, millions of insects, will mean nothing if I can save our people. David's eyes went colder at the word insects. He thought of the parents and friends who raised him on Earth, those who would be dismissed so flippantly. Insects, he answered. Too bad you're not as powerful as you think. His fist landed like a plunging planet, distorting Hell's face and hurling him back. You fled on Earth because you were afraid, David said, voice hard as stone. You thought that on Mercury, the sun's nearest world, your advantage would crush me. You gave up your only chance. Hell spat blood and reset his jaw with a snap. The sunlight mended the wound as it kissed his skin. Even if you weaken me, I heal quickly. I'll still be strong. David's reply was a snarl as electricity coiled around his fist. He unleashed a cascade of strikes, fast and brutal. Hell flailed under the onslaught, battered like a leaf in a storm. Then David wrenched his will. The lantern ring poured out a river of green energy, and for miles it solidified into an almost tangible aura. David had crafted it around them, and embedded throughout that field was the simulated kryptonite spectrum, ray upon ray, a suffocating green chorus of radiation. Clark reacted at once, using his own ring to shield Kara from the radiance. The green light washed over Hell, his skin drained of blood, his voice fell to a raw whisper. The radiation filled the space between Mercury and the device like an emerald tide. David's voice, cold and unblinking, cut through the charged air. Now, do you still think you can take everything? Chapter 192, Hades Master. No. Hell trembled all over, swaying helplessly in the air. The kryptonite radiation had sapped him nearly dry. He was too weak to use many of the abilities ordinary Kryptonians couldn't even imagine losing. He tried to teleport away, but found he couldn't. He was fading fast. Your powers are failing, aren't they? David said, watching him with a cold smile. 100 Kryptonians would be dead in this condition. At least you can still fly. I still have to save Krypton. I can't fall here. Hell snarled, eyes bloodshot. Like a trapped animal, he lunged, reckless and desperate. David was a step ahead. He flashed into position, and the speed Hell saw was that of an old man. David dodged easily, grabbed Hell by the throat, and held him suspended. Do you still think we gave ourselves up willingly? Hell tried another tactic. Clark, Carl, Krypton is your home too. Think of your birth parents. Your mother, Lara, you've never met her, have you? Don't you want to be with her? To hear her sing you lullabies? He aimed the plea at Clark, trying to crack him. David's grip tightened while his eyes, cold as steel, watched Clark. Clark's face flickered. He had never known Lara, had never heard her voice. No, he murmured. Hell thought he had found a way in, but Clark only shook his head. I have no memories of my birth mother, he said, voice steady. But I grew up with a mother who loved me. She gave me a home and everything I needed. What you want to do is kill her. His gaze went hard, meeting David's without flinching. No, you traitorous Kryptonian. Hell's expression flickered from hope to rage. He threw a desperate punch. David answered with a hydraulic smash to his abdomen. Hell spat blood, his face twisting in hatred. If it weren't for you, I could have saved Krypton. It's your fault. Your saving would kill billions to make one new Krypton in another timeline. David snapped. He twisted Hell's neck until it broke. Hell's last look was a frozen rictus of hatred and disbelief. His body collapsed, kicking up dust. Hell had been tough, an almost indestructible body and strong telepathy. There was no secure prison for a mind like his. There was no choice. David's eyes flared with cosmic heat, and he incinerated the corpse. He couldn't simply hurl Hell into the sun, as he sometimes did. The situation and the physics of Kryptonian physiology made that impractical, so he used concentrated heat rays to vaporize the body. Weakened by the river of kryptonite solution, Hell could not withstand it. His flesh burned away, leaving nothing but a pool of smoking lava. Clark watched the end of his father's former student in numb silence. He had never met Hell, but he knew the name and remembered the stories. Whatever Hell had once been, the long drift through life and the brutal struggles of the cosmos had twisted him into something else. Overman, Superman. Flash panted from before the shattered energy shield. He had lost count of the tens of thousands of punches he'd thrown. Everyone had been hammering at the barrier with no success. With Hell dealt with, David shifted into motion with super speed. He became a blur of red and struck the shield with one heavy fist. The barrier that had resisted everything the League threw at it splintered. Clark finished the device off with his heat vision. The radiant light bridge linking Mercury to the sun finally collapsed. It's over, Arthur said, collapsing to the ground with the others, every one of them exhausted. The sun, it's saved. The nearly spent Flash and Green Lantern exchanged wry, relieved smiles. Batman arrived then, sleek and fast in his Fenrir armor, several canisters of glowing green kryptonite solution secured beside him in the cockpit. When did Batman start enjoying being late like Gotham PD? Hal teased as he sat back on the pavement. Batman scanned the scene, briefly stunned at the speed of events, then nodded. I came as fast as I could. I didn't expect it to end so quickly. No one was surprised that David had once again resolved the crisis. He had first confronted Hell at the North Pole and again on barren Mercury. The conflict might have gone unnoticed if not for the enormous beam of light linking the Sun and Mercury that had alarmed the world. Cyborg had explained the situation publicly on behalf of the League. People learned, horrified, that the Sun had nearly been drained and Earth had walked the edge of annihilation. Overman and the Justice League had saved them. Thank you, Overman. I woke up this morning and I could still see the sun. Cheers and relief flooded the internet. Headlines screamed about how close the world had come to losing its star and how Overman and the League had rescued it. Gratitude poured out, alongside anger. Citizens demanded to know what their governments and the United Nations had been doing when the sun was almost taken. Amid the gratitude toward the League, a wave of dissatisfaction with political institutions began to build. At the White House, a spokesperson announced that the U.S. government would formally unveil an official government-sponsored superhero team next week, promising a more lawful and accountable force to protect the nation and the world. More legitimate? Batman read the words on his desktop at League headquarters 2 days later and frowned. He watched the ocean through the base windows, feeling the first stirrings of a new tide. Morning in Metropolis brought bright sunlight through open windows. At the Kent breakfast table, David chewed and scrolled through news on his phone, barely glancing at the articles. He'd seen the headlines and a few hints of the new government team formation, but he didn't much care for titles or institutions. He looked across the table. Where did Clark go so early? Jonathan had just come downstairs after fixing the barn, hair sticking up and eyes still sleepy. Martha wore an apron and carried a freshly baked raspberry pie. She glanced around the table, worry creasing her brow when she couldn't spot Clark, but she said nothing and sat. There was a short, tense silence while forks clinked against plates. They all knew what Martha feared. Clark's life as Superman had taken too much from him. The mornings he left before breakfast, the dangers, the ways Superman began to overshadow the life that should belong to Clark Kent. She only wanted her son safe, with a normal life if she could manage it. Across town at the Metropolis Museum, the red and blue figure flew down to a commotion. Police officers and tourists watched him land amid cheers. "Good morning, gentlemen," Clark said with a brief smile. He'd answered the call after the officers' radioed account. A strangely dressed man had entered the crowded museum, clutching 3 broken rubies that seemed to act as some kind of compass. When he bumped into a visitor, the situation escalated. A burly Mexican man was suddenly turned into a withered husk. "Superpower? Magic?" an officer whispered. Clark felt the headache coming on, but he had a job to do. He had been planning to stop by the Kent farm for breakfast after another quick call on Bronson Avenue. Now he'd be late. After the initial panic, the museum emptied and the ancient Greek exhibit grew silent. Clark found the man. He was middle-aged, dressed in a blue jumpsuit and hat, made up like a malevolent stage wizard, Faust. He stood by a crude clay pot centuries old, the brightest fragment of the 3 rubies shining at his fingertip. "Found it," Faust muttered, his voice hungry. He gestured, and the pot rose into his hand. Strange light flickered along his palm. With a sudden, violent motion, he smashed the jar and produced an ancient pestle-shaped stone component. "Mr. Wizard, this piece is almost 3,000 years old. It's part of the collection," Clark began. Faust merely smiled coldly. He didn't care about polite warnings. He muttered a spell, and as if by magic, the towering stone warrior statue from the central hall stirred. An ancient soldier in Roman garb, 6 or 7 meters tall, its stone creaked as it came to life. "Perfect," Faust said to the statue. "You're in good hands, Superman. I've other things to attend to." He cloaked himself in smoke and was gone. Clark reached out instinctively, but only empty air met his hand. The statue loomed above him, and the warrior's gargantuan stone sword came down with a crushing blow. Clark flew like a cannonball through the museum's glass facade, tumbling dozens of meters into the street before catching himself. Shards rattled everywhere. Bystanders gasped at the sight of Superman hurled through display glass. Clark shook the glass out of his hair and went back to finish the job. The statue wasn't bright, but it was dangerous. He fought it back into the museum. Stone crashed, walls trembled, and soon the statue's head was knocked clear through the building and nearly into a row of police cruisers. He explained, apologetically to stunned officers, then took to the sky, frowning and searching for Faust. The wizard's brutal appetite for violence and the manic joy he showed after acquiring the stone component made Clark uneasy. There was a purpose to this, one Clark couldn't yet see. Meanwhile, Faust was nowhere in Metropolis. He rubbed the pestle-like stone between his fingers, drew a circle in the air, and opened a ring of hellish fire. A sulphurous smell rose and faint, miserable wails echoed from beyond the blaze, as if the circle opened into a place of torment. "Master, I have found a fragment of the key," Faust reported into the fire. A voice answered from within the hellflame, majestic, imperious, the sound of a ruler who had been caged too long. "Very good, Faust. What are you waiting for? Go and find the second piece." "Aye," Faust began, then the flame flared angrily, and the voice cut him off with a harsh reprimand. The fire rose and licked at his face. Faust stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. From the other side, the voice grew colder, like a monarch perched atop a throne, tapping fingers against unyielding marble, and regarding a trembling courtier with icy contempt. "With the power I gave you, plus your petty spells, even Mount Olympus, under my brother's hypocritical rule, would bow to you. What more do you need?" Faust trembled at being named. "I understand, Master. I will retrieve the other 2 fragments, and then head to the caverns beneath Paradise Island to release you." "Hurry. I cannot wait to return and rule the world." The voice seethed with impatience and suppressed fury. "Yes, Master of the Underworld, the great Master Hades." Faust bowed his head even lower, reverent and terrified. Chapter 193, Pluto Unleashed. After an unfruitful search through the city, Clark had no choice but to go home. "Clark, what's wrong with you?" Martha asked, eyeing her son's rumpled hair as she brushed a few wood chips from it. "Nothing, Mom. I ran into a man dressed as a wizard this morning and fought a moving stone statue," Clark said, sinking down at the table. He started on the remaining breakfast while waiting for news from Batman. He had already sent a request for help to League headquarters before coming back. "Batman, this morning, a man in wizard's robes robbed the downtown Metropolis Museum. He killed people with what looked like magic and stole an item that was magically protected. I think there's more to this. Can you help identify him?" Thinking about magic and remembering that David had somehow come across a wizard's diary, Clark looked at David and relayed the morning's events. "Do you have any impression of the magic he used, or of the protected stone pillar?" David, who had finished eating and was leafing through the newspaper at the far end of the table, shrugged. The so-called magic diary had been an excuse he'd used to explain how he knew about LS Road Pond. He didn't actually know anything about magic. "Magic," he repeated blankly. "The Rock of Eternity has the world's largest museum of magical history." There were countless books there, but David didn't care to read them to answer Clark's question. If that wizard really wants to destroy Earth and rule the world, he'll make his move when the time is right. David sounded bored, and Clark tried not to let his frustration show. Waiting for him to act on his own could be catastrophic. We have to stop him before it gets worse. "Then I wish you luck," David said casually. Moments later, Batman sent a voice message in the League's internal channel. After Superman's alert, he and Cyborg had pulled surveillance footage of the museum incident. Cyborg's specialized searches meant that as long as this wizard left a digital trace, he wouldn't be able to hide. Felix Faust was once a moderately successful archaeology professor, Batman narrated. He became obsessed with mysticism and lost his position. His fixation drove him to darker things. He swore revenge on those who mocked him, Cyborg added. People around him began to disappear, and then he dropped out of public view. "Disappeared?" Clark asked from the table, eyebrow lifted. He had been hoping for more solid leads. "It's a good thing he didn't hide in some cave like the old-school wizards," Batman continued. "He stayed in the city." On the other end of the line, Batman's gloved fingers brushed across a bookshelf while Cyborg scanned the rest of the room. They were in a house filled with artifacts. Maya, Babylon, countless relics from ancient civilizations that bore mystical elements. Cyborg connected to the net to compare items, picked up a golden scepter with a crystal inset over the fireplace, and tested its weight. Lightning flashed from the crystal, ripping toward the wall like a bullet. Batman grabbed his cape, shielding himself from flying debris, and glared at Cyborg. Cyborg put the scepter down quickly, hands up. I didn't expect that. Be careful. We're dealing with a wizard, Batman warned, and resumed a careful search of the shelves. Found it. His finger stopped on several newly acquired tomes and at some open books on the desk. Hades, Styx, the gods of death. The books were focused on death deities, especially Greek myth. Each ominous title changed Batman's expression as he briefed Clark. Hades, the god of the dead? Clark set down his plate, surprised. Could the wizard be searching for something to do with the underworld? There's a layer of dust on the table. Faust hasn't been back here in a long time. Batman wiped his finger across the dust and frowned. Most of the items in this room are magical artifacts he's collected from around the world. What would be important enough to make him abandon his home? What did Faust discover? What's he looking for? Clark asked. Before any of them could answer, David's lantern ring started flashing wildly. He looked up from the paper as Diana's voice came through. Urgent. David, someone has invaded Paradise Island. Mother sent a distress signal. Panic threaded Diana's tone as she gathered her sword and shield. I'm heading to Paradise Island now. Paradise Island is under attack? David set the paper down, stunned. Zeus had cast protective magic over Paradise Island to keep it hidden. Over the centuries, that protection had faded, so it was possible someone could find the island, but it was shocking enough to make Hippolyta, the Amazon queen, send a distress signal. Someone powerful must have discovered the island. David stood, recalling Batman's discoveries. You just mentioned Greek mythology, right? Yeah, why? Clark rose too. Something was wrong. There's a gate beneath Paradise Island that connects to the underworld. David narrowed his eyes. He'd thought they were dealing with a run-of-the-mill rogue wizard. He hadn't expected it to involve Paradise Island. Cut to the palace. The Amazons were in full defense. Kill them. Eliminate the invaders, the Amazons shouted, loosing volley after volley of arrows. But Faust stood at the center of the attack, ringed by a protective field that deflected arrows as if they were blunt pebbles. He formed a ritual seal with his hand while an ancient bronze medallion around his neck pulsed with light. The medallion depicted a woman with serpentine hair, her mouth open in a roar, the visage of a gorgon. The light hit the Amazons, and one by one they froze, turning to roaring stone statues. A triumphant smile curved Faust's lips. He had followed a trail to Paradise Island, and with that treasure his master had shown him, combined with the godlike power he'd been given, even the gods' favored Amazons fell at his feet. Queen, you finally appeared. It's not too late to lay down your sword, Faust called as Hippolyta emerged from the palace, grim and resolute. You're late with the news from Hades. I am no longer the ruler of the Amazons, Hippolyta scoffed. She snatched a bow and fired an arrow like a meteor. It made ripples across Faust's shield, but failed to break it. Even Ares was defeated by the new king of the Amazons. Whoever it is, when he returns to Paradise Island, he will face my master, Hades, king of the underworld. Faust taunted. He activated the medallion again. The final Amazons, including Hippolyta, froze and became stone. Faust strode past the palace to the cavern beneath the island. Deep below, a vast cold cavern opened to a monumental stone door carved with dizzying runes, a threshold humming with terrifying magic. Faust withdrew 3 key components he had collected from across the world, segments that, when combined, formed a massive stone key. Each had been guarded, one by a stone giant, one by an abyssal serpent, one by an environment that could twist the mind. But with power granted by Hades, he had taken them all. He drew a circle in the air and spoke through the door. Master, I will release you now. Hurry, I can't count how many years I've been trapped in this prison, a roar answered from beyond the threshold. The 3 parts merged into a giant stone key and slid into the door. The runes dimmed. With a thunderous rumble, a seal that had held for eons released. The earth shuddered as tongues of hellfire licked out, melting rock to lava. A tall man in tattered cloak and armor, his face indifferent yet commanding, stepped out, closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and laughed up at the sky. Behind him rose thousands of spectral undead, wailing and roaring. Mortals, he declared, I, Hades, have returned. The divine majesty of the scene took Faust's breath away. Batman and Cyborg were finishing their search of Faust's residence and preparing to return to the League when an alert flashed across Cyborg's wrist. He went pale. Global disaster alert, he murmured. He'd set a worldwide early warning system. Anything big enough would trigger it. What is it? Batman demanded. Cyborg tapped commands. Northeast of the Atlantic, near the North Sea, countless undead are rising from the ocean, attacking Britain, Norway, Denmark. The offensive is spreading globally. He fed in satellite and news feeds. Masses of dead, eyes burning red and skin shriveled, crawled from the water in hordes. The tide itself looked gray and dead as they surged onto coasts and into cities. On London's waterfront, people scattered in panic. Police fired, but bullets sank into desiccated flesh and had little effect. The dead swarmed the streets of the modern city. Faust, Batman said, connecting the dots. Hades, the god of the dead. Gather the League. We're heading to the epicenter. Whoever or whatever is causing this will be there, Batman ordered. We'll stop those undead from wrecking the world. On the way to Paradise Island, Clark listened as David filled in the rest of the story, his face growing more serious. Clark had dealt with mythic beings before, but Hades was different. He was the ruler of death itself in Greek myth, and his arrival in the human world set nerves on edge. A long time ago, David began, the Greek gods fought the Titans. Hades betrayed Olympus. He let the Titans into the gods' stronghold in return for power. Zeus and the other gods fought them back, though. Hades was defeated and fell. As punishment, Zeus cast him into the underworld and sealed the passage between the underworld and the living world. Zeus broke the key into 3 pieces and entrusted them to Hippolyta, the Amazons, to keep. So the stone piece Faust found was one of those keys? Clark asked, the pieces of the puzzle slotting into place. Part of the key, David corrected. He stopped speaking and stared out toward the ocean, toward Paradise Island and the distant advancing army. On the horizon, like a malign tide, came an endless mass of undead, far more than could be counted. Hades could raise as many dead as had ever perished. An army that size could swamp the world. What's wrong? Clark asked. That passage has been opened, David said quietly. Hades has escaped. David looked up at the sky, his gaze deep and unblinking. Chapter 194. You Have an Aura I Hate, 4K2. Paradise Island had become a grave. The Amazons lay frozen as stone statues, the gate to the underworld yawning open, and endless ranks of the dead poured out. Evil spirits circled the sky and issued bone-chilling cries. The island's familiar beauty was gone, replaced by a landscape that resembled the underworld itself. Diana returned to that horror, cutting down reanimated corpses as she pushed toward the island's center, shield raised, intent on finding the source of the catastrophe, rescuing her kin from the enchantment that held them, and locating her mother, whose fate she did not yet know. In celebration of your release, Great Master, I brought you a gift. At the underworld gate, Hades, freed and already drawing his sword, had summoned an endless army of the dead and begun his conquest of the mortal realm. Faust bowed and stepped forward. With a gesture, a stone statue of Hippolyta floated out from the gloom. The Queen of the Amazons, my brother's lover, Faust announced. Hades smiled, amused. The brave, great queen, why so still? He reached out and touched the statue. Hippolyta's petrification dissolved only from the neck up. Faust's eyes widened, a fervor lit his face. As expected of the legendary Hades, king of the underworld, one of the strongest gods on Olympus, alongside Zeus and Poseidon. Hades! Hippolyta's voice was full of terror. Unable to move below her neck, she glared at Faust. You freed him, you madman. It's been many years, Hippolyta. Hades' gaze swept the ruined island, taking in what had once been a paradise. He stroked his chin and chuckled, but the humor was ice cold. My brother built this haven for you and his daughter, while I was cast down, sent to rot in Tartarus in the Styx. For millennia, I endured the poison fire of the pits. That's what you deserve, Hippolyta spat. Do not forget what you did, your betrayals and your shamelessness. Hades shrugged off her fury. Faust stepped forward, hands trembling. Master, remember your promise? Oh yes, almost slipped my mind. Hades tapped his forehead and smiled. Help me escape and I'll give you the ultimate magical truth. The words hit Faust like a drug. Magic begot gods. Anyone who knew the true nature of magic could wield untold power. Faust's breath quickened. He had heard hints of secret histories, of Hades' strange relationship with the source of magic itself. Yet Hippolyta's scorn cut through him. Do not be a fool, she warned. He betrayed his own kin. He'll betray you too. Faust faltered, doubt and greed warring in his face. Hades, unbothered, let his hand curl into a finger that glowed with impossible light, a galaxy caught at the tip. Faust swallowed and stepped forward, unaware of the cold, murderous look Hades flashed. Hades was about to unleash divine annihilation when a voice outside the cavern, frantic, full of steel, pierced the air. "Mother!" Diana burst through the dead like a scythe, sweeping soldiers aside with the god-killer sword. She called again, voice cracking, hunting for her mother. At a glance, Hades sensed her, the lasso of truth at her waist, divine artifacts gleaming. A faint glimmer crossed his eyes. He paused. "You haven't brought me enough, Faust," Hades said. Faust's eyes were red with desire. "Master, will you give me the ultimate truth?" "Not her alone," Hades replied. "There are others on this island." He straightened, watching the sky. "Heroes still walk the mortal world? It reminds me of my brother's demigod sons. I wonder how they compare." From above, Clark dove like a cannonball, smashing through ranks of dead and blasting dozens aside with heat vision. He had no compunction about attacking corpses. David, some powerful sorcerer, forced his way onto Paradise Island. He's heading toward a forbidden place my mother never allowed anyone to enter. I don't know what's there. Seeing Clark, Diana looked up and found a familiar figure in the heavens. This must be connected to what's under the island. Mother's probably down there. David, watching from the air, peered into the earth. Below he saw the petrified Hippolyta and Faust. Another form loomed, tall, armored, cold, and utterly domineering. "That must be Hades, escaped from the underworld," he said quietly, understanding the threat at once. A roar rolled up from the depths. A volley of skeletal arrows rose and rained toward David in the sky, but his presence caused them to collapse into the ground. Then a crushing gravitational field slammed down over Paradise Island. Thousands of the dead were flattened into dust as if buried by a mountain. Clark and Diana were forced to halt. David reached toward the earth, trying to pry the rock open and rescue Hippolyta. He had slain the god of war once and grown immeasurably stronger since. Still, facing Hades made him cautious. Hades was not easily overcome by mere manipulation of gravity. "To challenge Hades with gravity alone is naive," David muttered. From below, Hades' voice, tinged with disgust, echoed in David's ears. "Mortal, you carry an aura I detest, more than one." David felt the accusation like a chill. The power he now bore, the Shazam Force, the six gods' power, carried traces of Solomon's wisdom and Atlas's stamina, but part of it originated from Zeus or his progeny. Hades recoiled from that taste. Like a venomous snake eager for revenge on the world, he sneered, "You are not to my liking." "You dare to speak to me that way?" David replied, voice low but clear. Hades flared. He snapped his fingers and shaped his gray-green divine power into a deathly bident, launching it through the cave ceiling and toward David. David ducked. The weapon slammed into a medium island miles away. The impact withered every plant, turned animals into shriveled husks, and left the isle a blasted wasteland. David watched, expression grave. The reality of Hades' power sank in. Faust, impatient, floated up and unleashed a barrage of magical bolts, forcing Diana and Clark to dodge. He wanted the daughter of Zeus captured quickly, coveting Hades' promise. "Stay here, Hippolyta," he called. "When I finish them, we will speak of my brother's cruelties." Hades only half listened. He rose from the underworld tunnel and appeared above the battlefield, a few dozen meters from David. "When I was bored in hell, I enjoyed burning people to cinders," he boasted. Hellfire, malevolent and hot as hatred, poured from his mouth. The flames felt like a perverse magic capable of torturing souls, and they shredded the clouds, staining the sky red. David snatched a bolt of lightning and hurled it at Hades, but the hellfire swallowed it. The pillar of fire chased him across the sky. Hades laughed, pupils turning vertical and emerald like some monstrous predators. "Tastes like the power of my brother, familiar but weak." Far away, Firestorm looked back and saw one island turned into a vast graveyard, the work of Hades' bident. Element Woman felt that maw of doom yawn in that direction and shivered. "Good news. Superman says Overman and Wonder Woman have arrived there. We just need to keep these corpses contained and protect the mortal world." Green Lantern swallowed nervously as distant attacks signaled a terrible fight. Hawkgirl, wings beating, cleaved the tide of dead with her nth metal mace. Limbs and bone rained where she passed. I didn't expect my first Justice League mission to be this disgusting, she muttered, grim. The dead came on like a tide, mummified flesh, skulls grinning with black gums, boots sloshing through seawater, reeking of decay as they lunged and clawed. Element Woman's skin paled. She sent out flamethrower attacks from her palms. Firestorm flew between bodies with nuclear flame, half annoyed, half exhilarated. I missed a lot while I was away, but I'm here now. I can help. Despero's earlier assault on the League had coincided with the three newcomers taking leave: Firestorm, Element Woman, Hawkgirl, and their reasons varied: split minds, family worries, and more. Firestorm grumbled about being forced on vacation by Professor Stein and insisted he hadn't been scared by Despero. Element Woman's father had nearly stopped her from returning to the League after she'd lost an arm in that same battle. Hawkgirl fought in silence, all business. Firestorm was about to jabber on when Batman plunged in, cutting down a swath of walking corpses and bringing the chatter to an end. He looked up at the sky with a tight jaw. Hades, king of the underworld. He remembered Superman's words. The world's threats now required everything the League had. Overman, can you protect this world again? He asked, voice low, eyes hard as flint. You're the one who turned my people into stone, aren't you? Diana dove through a hail of magic and drove her godkiller sword at Faust, her eyes blazing. He had been the architect of the petrifications. That's right, he admitted, shifting midair to avoid the blow and touching the ancient bronze medallion at his chest, which glowed faintly with spent power. Regret flickered across his face. This treasure is limited. After turning so many Amazonian warriors to stone, it can't be used again for now. Otherwise, taking you would have been effortless. You forget I wear my mother's guardian silver bracelets. Your dark magic won't touch me, Diana snapped. She lashed the lasso of truth around a huge tree, uprooted it like a carrot, and hurled the trunk. The 15-meter behemoth smashed into Faust's magical shield and shattered. Between the splinters, Diana lunged. Her godkiller sword bit through his barrier. Faust staggered back, narrowly avoiding a strike that might have cleaved him in two. You really are not to be underestimated. The daughter of a king of the gods, indeed. Faust's face turned grim. He scattered seeds into the wind. They sprouted into thick, thorned vines that lashed outward, their barbs shimmering with a strange black malevolence. They struck at Diana like giant constrictors. She parried and fought them off, swords singing. Faust, schooled in sinister arts and bolstered by Hades, held his own. The Amazon's artifacts gave Diana advantage, but not dominion. For a long moment, the pair were deadlocked. Hey, monster! Look here! Clark shouted after dodging another wave of Faust's spells. He'd seen a tall, armored figure suddenly flare with hellfire and start hunting David. Clark surged upward and struck Hades from behind. The blow seemed to land, but Hades pivoted and, with a casual flick, sent Clark cartwheeling like a tossed ball. Clark slammed through trees, tore into a cliff face, and skidded out embedded in the mountainside. Blood stained his lip. His head rang. He stared up at the towering, armored god. Is this the power of Hades, king of the underworld? Hades had barely turned when an iron fist filled his sight and detonated against him. The blast flattened trees like grass and hurled the god back. Hades' features hardened into fury. Who do you think you face? Kneel mortal. His roar twisted the sky and shook the earth. A wave of divine energy swept outward, the aftershocks trembling through the island. David stood with arms crossed against the surge, then advanced, lightning crackling across his skin as he answered with a punch. You wanted to leave the underworld so badly? Fine. I'll send you somewhere more beautiful than the mortal plane. Gods shared an arrogance born of centuries of worship. Ares had it. Hades had it now. Even a minor slight could unleash ruin. The more beautiful place David meant was Olympus, Hades' final destination if he died. He taunted, "You're even more arrogant than my brother's most brainless son, Hagrid." Hades' eyes flared. Green-tinged, deathly mist curled from his hands. Within it pressed countless twisted faces that shrieked. The temperatures plunged as underworld winds laced the air. "I'll teach you reverence." Lightning met the chill of death as the two clashed. Hades, startled, found the mortal stronger than he expected. The god's hands tingled from blocking blows. He refused to tolerate it. Shedding human form, he unveiled his true aspect: wolf-like ears, a monstrous visage, bone-white horns and 3 writhing tongues. Hideous and alien, the thing roared, "This is my true power. Feel the might of a god." A blow from Hades blasted David dozens of meters. David staggered, then gathered himself, stoked the cosmic energy within, and charged again. Hades' divine death power outmatched the raw Zeus-given force that rode with the Shazam link, but the bone-chilling dread it carried seemed to phase David only briefly. The cosmic fire in him flared like a nova, and with each strike, David began to turn the tide. His punches carried the force to overturn rivers, and he drove Hades backward. "Cerberus, my hound!" Hades bellowed. The sky leaked blood-red light, and the ground answered with a bestial roar. A gargantuan, dark-red shadow burst through the earth, lava trailing its massive body. 3 maws opened, one drooling molten rock, another dripping the soul-scouring waters of the Styx, the third spitting a thick, black venom. The hellhound lunged. David fell back to dodge as the 3-headed monster attacked. "Tear him apart!" Hades cried. The beast leapt at him and was met by a blur of motion. Clark had intercepted, grabbed a neck, and slammed Cerberus into a distant mountain. The hound howled like a broken volcano as Clark hoisted and slammed it into the earth, pinned on top of the thrashing beast, poised to strike. Lava spewed and scalded him, but he shook it off and charged again with brutal speed. The wrestling match was titanic. Trees snapping, earth pulverized, dust and smoke choking the air. Clark grunted. The hellhound's strength was immense. Hades' face tightened. With his hound occupied, he condensed divine energy into a bident and hurled it at David. Death power surged like a tidal wave. For a long, brutal stretch, raw physical might and corrupt divine power collided with equal ferocity. Farther out at sea, the League fought the undead tide pouring toward the island. Cyborg hovered on jets, his ultrasonic cannon turning mummies into desiccated husks. Hal Jordan's lantern ring flared, building a floating platform and even a vertical Gatling-like construct, spitting light-fast bullets that shredded the undead. Arthur moved like a leviathan in the water, his trident stirring waves that capsized boats and dragged hordes beneath to shatter them on the seabed. Firestorm, grinning, dipped his hands into the ocean and began to convert surface water to napalm. The blue gave way to a spreading blackness, and when he fired, a 10-mile scorch blossomed into a towering inferno that licked the sky. Cyborg and Hal flinched back. The smell of burning corpse and napalm rolled over them. "Cough, this was a mistake," Firestorm croaked, covering his nose. Even Batman in his mech pulled back, disgusted. Green Lantern quickly fashioned a gas mask. Cyborg snapped on a steel faceplate, and Element Woman let loose a cloud of pink freshening gas that barely helped. Hawkgirl beat upward on furious wings, eyeing the inferno and the battles below with concern. Firestorm's reckless power had reshaped the battlefield, but it did not stop the tide. The undead poured in like ants across a barren plain. The burning sea only slowed them as they drowned and kept coming. Their numbers were inexhaustible. "How many more are there?" Hal asked, weary. "Our energy is finite," Cyborg said grimly, "but this horde seems endless." Batman keyed the comms. "Flash, how's the city?" "Almost done," came the rasped reply. "Ports cleared." Flash's breath was heavy. Even with speed, his body had limits. The League's plan was to hold crucial points and then surge to Paradise Island to help Overman and Superman. Batman signaled the team to break through the coastal fronts and move. This fight demanded reinforcements at Paradise Island, and experience with gods and necromancy was scant among them. Their last encounter with an ancient spell had nearly cost them everything. Back above Paradise Island, both Hades and David felt their reserves ebbing. Hades, furious at a mortal who would not die to divine death, struck again. "Why are you still alive?" he snarled. He drove another condensed spear of death energy at David, confident it would turn this whole ocean into a dead zone. The beam met David's fist and scattered. David charged through the blast to Hades and hurled the god hundreds of meters. Blood leaked from Hades' mouth as he staggered to his feet, eyes wide with a look that was almost animal, astonishment and a dawning, terrified fury. David had been strong physically, yes, but Hades had expected his divine death power to be decisive. He had counted on that advantage. The mortal's endurance and the way he purified or shrugged off the death energy were something Hades had not foreseen. The balance of the battle, once thought clear, was tipping in ways the king of the underworld had not imagined. Chapter 196, Cosmic Deathbringer, 4K2. During the fight, Hades' death divine power easily overwhelmed David's lightning. Wave after wave of malicious divine energy struck his body, boring into his flesh like maggots. At first, David showed no sign of pain, and Hades didn't take him seriously. This mortal's body was even stronger than his divine form. But as the battle dragged on, the death divine power accumulating in David reached terrifying levels. Still, he showed no discomfort, which left Hades incredulous. "You should have been mummified by my divine power long ago," Hades snarled. "You should have been made to beg for release on your knees." Hades was constantly driven backward in midair by David's brutal attacks. "I did feel your power," David admitted coldly, his iron fists hitting like exploding meteorites. In the past, he could neutralize enemies through energy conversion, but as foes grew stronger, their casual attacks exceeded what he could absorb in the short term. Hades' divine power was 10 times more malicious and harder to convert than Ares's, like the river Styx itself, corrosive and relentless. Converting it was not like eating and drinking. It felt like pouring a bottle of disinfectant into his stomach. David drove Hades fist first into the earth, shuddering Paradise Island as the grotto split. "I don't know why," David said, "but when your divine power entered my body, it didn't destroy me. It seems very compatible with me." "Compatible? Mortal, what nonsense is this?" Hades spat, blasted into the broken grotto. His divine will had always bent his power to its purpose. How could it be compatible with a mortal? That his own death divine power would not attack unbidden made the possibility worse. Did that mean this mortal was more fit to be master of the underworld than Hades himself? Hades, who had always resented the crown his brother thrust on him, could not accept that an unheard-of mortal might be more worthy of that mantle. Template fusion. Floating above the grotto with the brilliant sun behind him, David looked down as atomic searing light shot from his eyes, slicing into Hades. Hyperion's signature atomic ray, a beam of cutting, terrifying heat emitted from the eyes, had manifested once his fusion exceeded 65%. When Hades first felt his power transferred into David, David had been worried and distracted, trying to expel the death divine power. But realizing that Hades' might could not harm him, he stopped conserving energy and attacked full force. "I don't believe it," Hades roared, shielding his chest from the heat vision. Like a furious, sinister bat, he dove back in and poured more death divine power into the assault. This time, David didn't bother to defend. He met Hades, blow for blow. Suspended beneath the shattered grotto, David took the king of the underworld's furious onslaught without yielding. Hades' death divine power struck like an illusion of light, tossing David and making him cough blood, yet David kept advancing. Another heat ray hit Hades and hurled him dozens of meters backward, gouging a deep, bone-exposed wound on his chest and driving him toward the gates of hell, the very passage from which he had escaped. Hippolyta, her body petrified below the neck, gasped in disbelief. "He's even stronger." It had only been a handful of days by David's measure, but in her millennia she felt the change. David's strength had multiplied several times. He was suppressing Hades, the king of the underworld. Admittedly, David had not fully learned the deepest aspects of Hades' power. The fight had been unfair in that respect, but there are no truly fair battles. As for why David was immune to Hades' death divine power, he now had a faint realization. It had to be the effect of the Thanos Template. In the Marvel multiverse, Thanos is a natural harbinger of death, linked to the cosmic entity Death that balances life and death across the multiverse. As Death's harbinger, Thanos' potential and status tower above an earthly old god like Hades. During David's last battle with Brainiac, part of the Thanos template fused with him and had activated, granting him an unexpected property, immunity to the ravages of death. "Even if I don't know why my divine power can't affect you, mortal," Hades snarled through wounds and lightning burns as gray-green light wove around him to mend his form, "don't delude yourself that you can slay me." David, crackling with lightning, admitted it honestly. "True, your divine power can't harm me, but I can't kill you either." Hades was not like Ares or other gods. He controlled death itself. Killing him required means David did not possess, and Hades' power was exceptionally hard for him to convert into a lethal attack. "So I'll do the next best thing," David said with a small smile. "I'll push you back into hell." Hippolyta's voice suddenly snapped his attention. "Destroy the key and trigger the underworld seal. You might still be able to send him back." The key that sealed the underworld passage was crucial. She had known it all along, but her petrification had left her mute and immobile, and no one else had been able to act. David had been so focused on suppressing Hades that he'd nearly forgotten this vital detail. "You dare not!" Hades bellowed when he saw David looking at the ancient key embedded before the gates of hell. He lunged to stop him, desperate. David let Hades crash into him and then wrapped his arms around the god. As they tumbled toward the grotto's mouth, David chuckled softly. "Hades, did you forget something?" In Hades' widening eyes, David raised his palm and clenched. A massive gravitational field, as heavy as several mountains, slammed into the key. The ancient artifact cracked into 3 pieces and shattered. Previously, David's gravity had been unable to overwhelm Hades' protection, but the key, a device designed specifically to seal the underworld, was not tarred by Hades' divine aura. Golden, merciless light burst from the gates. A huge suction force enveloped the master of the underworld, pulling him toward the abyss. "No!" Hades screamed, claws raking at the air. "Even if I'm dragged back to hell, I'll take you with me." His hands reached for David and then for Hippolyta. His hatred for David outstripped even his resentment of Zeus. Humiliated by being bested by a mortal, Hades tried to seize both. David mocked him as he pushed back. "By what right, Hades? You can't even hold on like a woman." With a single shove, Hades' grasp was forced open by an overwhelming divine power. The battle had drained David, but Hades had spent far more. With nothing to anchor him, Hades went tumbling through the gates of hell like a man falling into an abyss of fire. "At least I'll take you with me, Hippolyta." Hades hissed in his last instant, his monstrous hand stretching toward the petrified queen. Her petrified body could not move, and terror spread across her face. David's heat vision pinned Hades' chest and pushed him another step inward, so Hades' claws closed on empty air. "No!" he howled. The scream died as he was swallowed by hellfire. The gates slammed shut with a thunderous boom. The golden light vanished. Silence returned. "He's finally back in hell," Hippolyta said, her face pale and trembling. She had nearly been dragged into the underworld. She looked at David with gratitude. As Hades was sealed away, the army of the dead he had summoned, entities that did not belong in the mortal world, were dragged back underground and sea into hell as well. Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that had been suppressed by Clark's astonishing power, was pulled down and vanished. Clark, bearing a few claw marks, rose to his feet. "Is it over?" David actually defeated Hades. Faust, who had been tangled with Wonder Woman, stared toward the grotto in horror. He felt the magical fluctuation. Hades was gone from the mortal realm. The ultimate magical truth Hades had promised him was probably lost. "Faust, you caused all this. There's nowhere to run." Faust spun to flee, but a flash of lightning and a sudden presence stopped him. The bronze medallion strapped to his chest vanished. David materialized in the air holding it, weighing it in his hand. "You were just a tool of Hades," David said quietly, "but because of you, the king of the underworld escaped and nearly unleashed a global catastrophe." Faust broke out in cold sweat, stammering. He tried to explain, to bargain, to flee. For a second, he cast a magical barrier. It shattered like glass. David moved without hindrance, seized Faust by the throat, and snapped it with a small twist. The man's neck broke with a crunch. Faust paid the price for his greed. David meant to hand the bronze medallion to a panting Diana so she and Hippolyta could figure out how to free the petrified Amazons. "Doesn't the island have its own magic?" he asked. "The medallion only controls petrification while its user lives," Diana explained. The moment Faust died, the medallion heated and the spell broke. One by one, the Amazons across Paradise Island began to move and come back to life. They saw their king, David, floating in the air and, understanding what had happened, knelt in unison in gratitude. Respected majesty. In truth, the artifact only works on the petrified as long as its wielder is alive, David said to Diana, who knew some magic. "Is everything already resolved?" Above, Batman and the others arrived, looking down at the ravaged island. a battlefield like the aftermath of a giant monster. On their way, they had seen the army of the dead dragged back to hell. Batman was silent for a moment. The others exchanged awkward looks. They had tracked the center of the boundless dead across the sea, thinking they might finally support Overman once and for all. As it turns out, one of them said, we were still late. Chapter 197, My Name is Yamozuo, 4K4. Then fire him and his whole team. They've burned through too much money and produced nothing. Luthor Group doesn't need dead weight. The elevator dinged open. The woman in the business suit, CEO of a multinational worth hundreds of billions, strode into the penthouse, heels clicking against marble, giving orders into her phone. I don't care what Rex did in his lifetime, or what plans he put in place. Luthor Group is mine to command now. She ended the call, opened the office door, and the penthouse was dark. She frowned and reached for the smart switch. Clap, clap, clap. Applause sounded from the darkness. Someone sat behind the desk. Moonlight slipped over him, outlining his shape. Rex? The CEO dropped her phone. Her face drained of color. She recoiled as if from a ghost. She had seen that man die. Overman had killed him on film. The image shouldn't have been here. Don't be afraid, Mossy. The one sitting here now isn't a vengeful spirit from hell. He clicked the desk lamp on. Rex Luthor leaned forward, hands clasped under his chin, amusement on his face. Impossible. You're dead. Mossy backed against the wall, terrified. Overman killed you. Everyone saw the footage. That one who died was only another me, Rex said calmly. His eyes flashed with old hatred. My face returns to collect a blood debt. Blood must be paid with blood. Strictly speaking, Rex Luthor had died. What sat in the chair was a clone, a contingency produced by the late Rex's plan. But distinctions meant nothing in the world of power. Whoever controls power on Earth is the real Rex Luthor, he said. He reclined and spread his hands, regarding the woman who trembled like a mouse before a snake. Don't be afraid. You ran Luthor Group well while I was out of sight. Rex, Mossy tried to find words. Rex clearly knew what she'd said the moment she entered. It hadn't sounded like praise. Perhaps you ran it too well. 38% of Luthor Group's shares are now in your hands. You are the largest single shareholder. Those words made her want to run. She imagined his hand at her throat. What would he do to someone who had swallowed 2 generations of Luthor family wealth? It's fine. Rex waved it off, as if indifferent. Actually, I should thank you. Thank you. She was stunned. Before you took over, I had to hide for a long time. People inside the group, each with their little schemes, began to siphon assets. Before my death, Luthor Group was full of holes and near collapse. Fortunately, after I was gone, you took charge, purged the parasites, and breathed life back into this tree. You did me a favor. You didn't let me down after I promoted you to senior management at such a young age. Rex, I'll sign over the shares immediately. I'll return the family's assets. Mossy spoke with practiced servility. She was a bat temporarily nesting in a snake's den. If she could buy her life, she would hand everything back. Besides, she remembered Rex showing superhuman power before his death. He'd even withstood Overman for a while. No hurry, Rex said, waving off billions in assets. I have a more urgent matter. Where is Dr. Ivo? Mossy blinked. Even the mention of his name had jolted Rex more than talk of billions. Ivo, Anthony Evo? Yes. Which lab did the group allocate him? I fired him 2 months ago. You what? Rex stood up, incredulous. You fired him? He was one of our best scientists, one of the best on the planet. You fired him? Rex's disbelief was palpable. I've been cutting expenses, Mossy explained. I eliminated unnecessary expenditures. One man had an entire lab. The projects he applied for funding for were vague, his directions fantastical, and he never produced results. Rex's expression shifted from gratitude to scorn. You can't see it, can you? History isn't driven by cautious people who play it safe. It's driven by geniuses the world doesn't understand. He stepped back into the shadows and left her with one last warning. Remember what you should and shouldn't say. Tonight, you never saw a ghost named Rex Luthor. Mossy stayed pale and shaking until she was sure he had gone. Only then did she let out a breath, like someone dragged from the water. In a hidden underground lab, Rex sat before a bank of monitors. Headlines screamed across screens, Global Scourge of the Dead, timely resolved by Overman and the Justice League. Cyborg names Hades, king of the underworld, as mastermind. Overman sends God of Death back to Hades. Clips played on loop. Overman stopping lightning monsters in Fawcett City, toppling Black Adam, helping the League fight ancient demons, battling extraterrestrial mercenaries. A montage of heroism, each frame a public affirmation of the man who had killed the old Rex. Rex's jaw tightened. Since his death, Overman had repeatedly saved the world. The previous Rex's plan, to use a live spectacle to make the world hate Overman, had failed. Any initial fear or doubt had been drowned out by Overman's string of spectacular rescues. The world seemed to conspire to give the superheroes every chance to shine. Rex swept his laptop off the table in a fury. "So Rex Luthor isn't dead," he muttered. But what did that change? His enemies had only grown stronger. He faced the same impossible situation, the same exhausted options. If the last Rex couldn't defeat them, can a new Rex succeed? He had to find new cards to play. One name rose in his mind like a desperate bet. Dr. Anthony Ivo, an unparalleled technological genius, the previous Rex's secret hope. By the lake on an autumn morning, David, known to the world as Clark Kent, sat on a fishing stool, staring into rippling green water. The last time the sun had been nearly drained by hell, panic had spread across the globe and given him unexpected emotional turmoil. Humanity's greatest fear, he thought, is the unknown. A visible disaster is terrifying, but an invisible one, something you can't predict or even be sure is happening, is worse. People had grown anxious. Even though the Justice League had declared each crisis resolved, unease lingered in daily life, during commutes, at work, at meals, in sleep. The public watched the League constantly, and that attention had fed the strange internal process David felt inside. His template integration had accelerated. At 89%, the next nodes promised new abilities. He had a premonition that at 90 or 95% he might receive Hyperion's supreme healing power. A sonic boom split the air. Clark, dressed in a suit and square-rimmed glasses, touched down beside the lake after checking no one else was nearby. "How did the interview go?" he asked. "Fine," David replied. Clark scratched his head, awkward. For a while, his parents had been worried that being Superman left him no life as Clark Kent. Jonathan and Martha had told him to find balance. You're not a god. You can't save everyone. Even when he was saving people, other tragedies happened elsewhere. Robberies, shootings, accidents. He couldn't stop everything. "I've been trying to live a normal life," Clark said. "That's why I applied at the Daily Planet." David nodded. Being a reporter was practical. It allowed legitimate investigation without arousing suspicion. Interviews could get him close to people Superman couldn't. "Your education," Clark hesitated. He hadn't finished college. "Not a problem," David said. "I offered them exclusive stories and photos to prove myself. They hired me as an intern reporter." Clark grinned. "Where's Dad? We always fish here this time of year." "Uncle Rick's tractor broke down. He asked Dad for help," David answered, then reeled in a fish. They settled into the old family routine, two brothers and their father testing patience and luck against the lake. "Let's see who catches more fish," Clark challenged, happy. He quickly added, "No superpowers," when he saw David's tackle box. The rule was part sport, part nostalgia. Patience had always been the key. Back in the city, Rex followed the trail to Dr. Anthony Evo's residence with urgency. He found the scientist in his sickbed, still covered in a white sheet. Rex's face went ashen. How could you die?" His last hope was gone. As he stared, a motion in the shadows made him turn. A tall, silver figure stood in the doorway, its voice flat and mechanical. "Who are you?" Rex demanded. "Hello, my father created me. My name is Amazo." Chapter 1198, Captain Atom and Major Force. Ladies and gentlemen, a calm, clear voice carried across the White House lawn. The White House spokesman, a middle-aged man with glasses and a hawk-like gaze, swept the assembled media with a look that took in every camera and microphone. The recent sun crisis has sparked heated debate across the country. Citizens in several states have questioned the federal government's ability to protect them. Some have even suggested that certain civilian superhero organizations should replace the United States as arbiters of international disputes to keep the world at peace. That idea is absurd, dangerous, and reckless. He slammed his hand on the podium as cameras flashed like a barrage. Superheroes are people who operate outside the law, relying on dangerous technology and superhuman powers. If such people were allowed to wield authority and make laws at will, the United States and the world would descend into chaos. Overman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, if they are the greatest heroes in the world, then what of our soldiers who have long protected the nation and maintained global order under the authority of the Constitution? Naming each Justice League member, the spokesman's impassioned tone swept over the crowd, his stare fierce on behalf of the unsung servicemen and women. For a moment, no one answered. Reporters exchanged nervous glances. The White House had long been careful not to discuss superheroes publicly. Now it was openly challenging their role, and the gathered press felt the tense promise of a storm they couldn't predict. Now, on behalf of the federal government, the White House, and the President, I will introduce you to the true superheroes of the United States. He pressed a button. The crowd craned their necks as several figures in armored battlesuits descended from the sky. 4 men and women, white and black, arrived on the lawn. These are the President's specially appointed Federal Super Task Force. First, the captain of this task force, Captain Atom. A man with a steel bristle crew cut stepped forward like a bastion, solid, unflinching. His skin shimmered with a silvery metallic sheen. He spoke little. Major Force. A second introduction followed. A soldier with his arms folded, carrying an expression of contempt and arrogance. His body, made of alternating bands of purple and yellow metal, radiated a force that made breathing feel tight. He, too, stepped forward. As cameras popped, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Unlike Captain Atom's steady, military bearing, Major Force looked more like a villain than a serviceman. The spokesman didn't let the audience dwell on it and moved on. Ji Tong, a young woman in black leather, lithe and defiant, chewed gum under black lipstick. Like a rebellious student summoned by a teacher, she walked forward with her arms crossed and an indifferent attitude. She didn't look like a soldier, more like a runaway punk from a rock concert. The crowd wondered where the federal government had found these people, except for Captain Atom, who at least looked the part. And finally, Black Lightning. A muscular black man stepped forward in a blue and black suit trimmed with a lightning bolt motif and yellow goggles. His frame was explosive, like a heavyweight boxer. At last, a familiar face. Reporters seized on the moment. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, but there would be no free questioning today. Black Lightning used to be a street-level hero, didn't he? Someone muttered. The hush of suspicion thickened. The White House's 4-person team read like an explicit counter to the Justice League, designed to confront supervillains across the U.S. and even intervene in international crises. But with only 4 members against the League's dozen-plus heroes, did the team have any chance? Aside from Black Lightning, whose physical prowess, even with his power over dark electricity, didn't seem to outstrip human champions, the real weight must lie with the first 3. The audience's skepticism was palpable. The spokesman leaned in, his voice low and firm. The Super Task Force reports directly to the White House and carries authority granted by the President. Most of its members have undergone military training and can survive nuclear detonations, blast yields in the millions or even tens of millions of tons of TNT. Their capabilities exceed the upper limits of human technological detection. They are the federal government's strategic humanoid weapons. Survive a nuclear blast. The crowd erupted as if a pot had boiled over. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. Nuclear bombs had been humanity's ultimate deterrent for decades. Now the White House claimed to have heroes who could withstand such force. The spokesman's emphasis on most hinted that, aside from Black Lightning, the other 3 might indeed have such resilience. How many Justice League members could boast the same? Overman, perhaps, but beyond him? What are the abilities of these 3? Someone demanded. Now I will introduce each member's abilities, the spokesman said with barely concealed triumph. The era when individuals elevated themselves above the Constitution by virtue of their powers ends today. A secluded villa sat in dense woods on a remote mountain. In a dim room, Rex, still at an embryonic stage, felt the old memory maps in his mind stir. The previous Rex had modified his genes, gifting him with hundreds of powers. He activated his enhanced vision and made out a figure in shadow, a 2-meter-tall, silver, streamlined body, smooth as cast iron, with a pair of red, camera-like eyes. Amazo, he murmured. The name was almost a prayer. If he was right, this metal thing before him was a nano-robotic creation, Anthony Ivo's possible final work. Anthony Ivo's corpse lay on the bed, one hand visible beyond the white sheet. The tall robot approached, knelt, and gently picked up that hand as if tucking a client into bed, an attentive, almost servile gesture. Rex's tension eased for a fraction. He had wanted to ask how Ivo had designed the machine. Amazo straightened and scanned Rex. Rex's face rippled across the robot's smooth visage. The machine raised its palm and stared at it with genuine curiosity, like a child seeing a toy. Suddenly the palm burst into flame, hardened into stone, then extended into blades and swords. This is, Rex stared in stunned silence. Those transformations were his powers. A wild idea flashed through his mind as he looked at the corpse on the bed. If his suspicion was true, how had Ivo created such a thing? Unimaginable, Amazo said flatly. When will Professor wake up? Amazo asked after exhausting Rex's abilities twice. He looked at the corpse with a strange, almost plaintive stillness. He hasn't paid attention to me for a long time. Rex felt a twinge of something like sorrow emanating from the machine. Anthony Ivo had been a unique, brilliant man, now dead. He will never wake up, Rex said, his voice hoarse. Why? Amazo asked, puzzled. Ivo had usually awoken within 6 or 7 hours. Now it had been over 17. You miss him? So do I. Amazo's understanding of the world was childlike. Rex put a hand on the robot's shoulder and feigned grief to manipulate it. But he's dead. He and I were close. Before he died, he told me he had someone to entrust to my care, someone to introduce to this world. He might have been talking about you. What is death? You will take care of me? Amazo asked, still curious and literal. Rex shook his head. I'll explain death later. For now, listen to me as you listen to the professor, and take care of me as you took care of him. If you don't, I'll join him in an eternal sleep, and then you'll be alone. You are not like the professor. Amazo said after studying Rex for 2 seconds. The machine's assessment squeezed Rex's chest. What's different? Rex asked. You are far stronger than the professor, Amazo replied seriously. Yes, I'm stronger than my best friend. Relief, quiet and intense, flooded Rex. He draped an arm around Amazo and led him to the window. Strength is relative. Let me tell you a story. A story? Amazo echoed. Once there was a young man who wanted to build an empire, to create a beautiful world. He endured countless hardships and nearly succeeded. Rex stared out into the dark timberline. Hatred flared in his eyes. But there were very bad people who didn't want him to succeed. They attacked him, drove him into hiding. Amazo listened without really understanding. Rex lowered his voice. That young man was me. I won't be defeated. I will rebuild my empire from the ruins, but my life is limited. I must find someone worthy to inherit everything I've built. His voice hardened. That person is you. I'll treat you like the son I never had. Amazo looked bewildered, then pointed at himself as if confirming the thought. An empire and a whole new world, just for him. My first step is to destroy the people who destroyed me, Rex said. Amazo considered a moment, then, in its mechanical monotone, replied, Excellent. Rex's excitement was barely contained. It had been simple to bend this machine's nascent loyalty to his will, far easier than he had expected. In his built-in memories, Rex carried countless examples of psychological manipulation and calculated deceit. It was almost boring how readily Amazo accepted him. Anthony Ivo's last creation, this newborn intelligence, might become the instrument of Rex's revenge, and one day, global domination. Anthony told me about your replication program, Rex said. But what are its limits? Professor said my evolution has no limits, only time, Amazo replied. It looked at its hands. Having just copied many sets of ability data from you, I need time to build models so the programs won't interfere. Needs time? Rex frowned. If Amazo truly had no practical limit to the powers it could copy, that should have been immediate. Now the machine's need for time felt like a flaw, an opening for rivals. Rex clenched his fist. The thought of Amazo having to time multiplex hundreds of power sets like a machine loading junk programs irritated him. If Amazo had copied Overman or Superman instead, there would be far fewer programs to run, and stacking them might be enough to overwhelm them. As hatred gnawed at him, he accepted the delay. He couldn't re-engineer Amazo now. He didn't even fully understand how Anthony Evo had conceived such nanotechnology. Scanning and replicating a person's powers with a glance seemed almost miraculous. Perhaps Evo had simply been brilliant. Perhaps he had gotten lucky near the end of his life. Scientific breakthroughs sometimes come by chance. Anthony Evo was dead, though, and Rex could no longer ask him. A sinister smile crept across Rex's face. It's better that he's dead. If he'd lived, I wouldn't have had my chance for revenge. Overman, Superman, enjoy your ignorant, peaceful lives. The ghost named Lex Luthor has returned from hell. I will devour you all. This world will be mine. The air above a small island between Metropolis and Gotham thundered with jets. For nearly a year, the Justice League had kept a covert headquarters hidden on that island. Now, giant supersonic fighters cut through the sky like a black cloud. Armed helicopters circled, guns and missiles trained on the mountaintop facility. Several powerful figures in armored suits descended slowly from the clouds. Batman and Cyborg, who were on duty at the headquarters, were startled by the alarm. Batman's face went hard when he saw the approaching figures. He immediately sent out a distress signal. Someone's finally run out of patience and made a move against us. Overman, Superman, there's a situation at headquarters. Chapter 199, Precursor to Quantum God. Some events leave signs before they happen. Ever since the White House announced it would create an official government superhero organization, Batman had expected a day like this. 2 days earlier, a White House spokesperson, speaking for the League government, had declared on national television that the era of individuals using their powers to place themselves above the Constitution was over. Batman knew action would follow quickly. He was right. 2 days was all it took. Justice League, this is a search warrant from the federal government. We are here to search your base on suspicion of criminal activity. Major Force held the warrant up, the president's signature prominent. Outside the League headquarters, a heavy cordon ringed the compound. Batman did not waste time verifying the document. It was real. A task force constituted directly under the president could produce thousands of warrants if it wanted. Criminal activity? Are you serious? Firestorm barked in disbelief. The League's reputation as the world's foremost heroes, to say nothing of their United Nations recognition, made the accusation absurd. Batman watched the exchange in silence as Atom Captain recited a litany of charges like a somber machine. Batman, you are accused of 374 federal felonies, including but not limited to willful grievous bodily harm, hit and run, manufacturing explosives, endangering public safety, trespass, assaulting law enforcement. Firestorm, you are accused of 103 federal felonies. Atom Captain continued, and then listed charges for Green Lantern, Element Woman, Cyborg, Hawkgirl, and the rest. Even the lightest totals for each person ran into the dozens. Cyborg stepped forward with the others, anger on his face. We were fighting supervillains. You expect us to stand by while a bank is robbed, people are kidnapped, or cities are destroyed? That's the point. You have no law enforcement authority. Atom Captain replied bluntly. Records show you're one of the masterminds of this criminal organization called the Justice League. Major Force tossed the warrant at their feet and crossed his arms. Batman remained still as the accusations piled up, his expression unreadable. This was predictable, Batman said calmly. When the White House decides to act against people like us, arguing is pointless. They make the laws. They can change definitions at will. What was heroic yesterday can be criminal tomorrow. He looked past Atom Captain at Major Force, and a criminal can be pardoned and elevated to stand before us as the president's enforcer. Clifford Zmek? Major Force's jaw dropped. How do you know my name? He looked around shocked and furious. All my records are classified. He clenched his fists. His posture betrayed a readiness to attack. The only woman among the 4 task force members, Ji Tong, recoiled as if from filth, moving hundreds of meters away. Black Lightning's face hardened. He had once applied to the League and been rejected. Not out of hatred, but professionalism. He never expected that a teammate in this presidential task force would turn out to be a murderer. Is that true, Captain? He demanded. Atom Captain reached to restrain Major Force, ignoring Black Lightning's question. Knowing top-secret government information is dangerous. A few words are enough to suspicion and discord. Batman, you are exceptional, worthy perhaps of having obtained the military-grade zero medal used to make the Fenrir armor. He looked at the unmanned Fenrir suit rising from the League's helipad. I'm curious about the man under that mask. I'm more curious about you, Batman said. I could trace Major Force until he disappeared into a certain top-secret military experiment. Your record is blank. Your clearance is even above his. You stand rigid and obedient, elite, cold. Have you served in a special military unit? Major Force bristled. He was a federal felon, but pardoned by the president. He is no longer a criminal. He raised his voice, trying to regain authority. Soldiers in nearby helicopters and jets stirred at the tension. Major Force's aura pressed down on the scene. Atom Captain's voice cut through, cold as a blade. We've hunted and eliminated the smooth-talking criminals. Do you know why? Because words alone aren't as sharp as guns. Batman spread his hands. The Fenrir armor thudded down behind him. He kept still. If the White House had sent this team to keep face, then Major Force, Atom Captain, and the others were no trifling match. The League could not defeat them outright. Batman hoped for backup, someone whose arrival would change the balance. A heavy rolling in the sky answered him. Thunderclouds swelled and violent currents churned. The fighter jets above suddenly trembled as if faced with a force they had not expected. Overman, he controls lightning. He's on his way. Someone shouted in the panic. Overman, the most powerful hero on Earth, arrived first. David followed, both cutting across the horizon and then halting in midair. The turbulence from their flight rocked the jets and helicopters. A few jets collided, burst into flames, and their pilots ejected. You finally showed, Overman. Superman, Cyborg said, relief making his voice light. In midair, Clark nodded to Batman. David fixed his calm, indifferent gaze on Atom Captain and the task force. That glance alone made the government team hesitate. Even Atom Captain's composure slipped. He could feel what David carried, a connection to the quantum field, near infinite energy, a presence that reduced continents and mountains to trivialities. Nathaniel Adam, U.S. Air Force officer, framed and sentenced to death. The government offered a pardon if he survived a secret experiment, David said softly, almost as a statement of fact. They sealed his information as top secret. After the experiment, placing him inside an alien craft and detonating a nuclear device beneath it, he emerged fused with alien metal and quantum energy. They called him Atom Captain. Batman had known the background for some time. Major Force's powers had been a crude government attempt to replicate that process. Clifford Zemeck had been the accidental, grotesque result. A rapist and murderer given power by a flawed experiment. David's presence grew into a physical pressure. He radiated a repulsive field like a massive celestial body. The crowded helicopters and fighter jets were shoved away like paper. Black lightning threw up his hands and answered with arcs of black electricity, but the force was overwhelming. He was driven back hundreds of meters. In moments, the government air armada had been cleared, leaving only the 3 task force members suspended in the void and the League's allies on the ground. Atom Captain's silver form was immovable, like a steel mountain. Jitong hovered like a weightless shadow. Major Force's stance wavered under the field. Then his chest erupted in blinding energy as David's eyes burned out a stream that hurled him miles away. He crashed through the shoreline, clutching his chest, terrified. You stand before me and call me scum? David's voice was distant, colder than the sea. Atom Captain and Major Force looked superficially similar, both metallic, different in tone and origin. Major Force had been the government's shoddy facsimile of Nathaniel Adam. Atom Captain's contempt was visible. He's nothing but a knockoff compared to the original. We're here to enforce the law, Atom Captain said. Cooperate, Overman. If you act, many of your teammates will die from the collateral damage. Atom Captain warned. The magnitude of the 2 men's power made the island's fate seem fragile. You could have acted sooner, David answered to Atom Captain, more than to the rest. You question the White House's orders, don't you? Their eyes met, tension like a taut cable. Batman, sensing things tilt in his favor with David's arrival, climbed into the Fenrir armor and hoped to mediate. He and the rest of the League were like insects compared to the 2 titans in the sky. If they fought, the world itself would tremble. You can't let masked vigilantes ignore the law, Atom Captain said. If anyone can don a suit and call himself a hero, then anyone can do as they please, bombard the streets and destroy cities. Atom Captain moved. His form emitted a fan-shaped impact wave like a tidal surge, designed to subdue everyone present. David hung in the void and let the energy come. He stood like a god of thunder, absorbing the wave into himself. Then, with a motion like catching a single bolt, he seized the gathered force and hurled it back. A brilliant spear of lightning whipped into the air and slammed toward Atom Captain. Unlike the other supervillains he'd faced, Atom Captain wasn't inherently evil. In the comics, he had even been a member of the Justice League. He was rigid, loyal to orders, and obedient to the U.S. government, a soldier through and through. That didn't mean David would show him mercy. Bang! "This is the will of the country," Atom Captain shouted. Divine thunder condensed into a spear and drove toward him, only to be slapped aside by Atom Captain's palm. His silver body looked as if it had been forged from the hardest substance in the universe. Even lightning that vaporized steel did him no damage. Like a silver bolt, he streaked through the sky, roaring as he swung a punch at David. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting the country beneath your feet. Some gods are weaker than mortals, yet you choose to be a lapdog," David sneered. Two fists, like colliding planets, met with a deafening crash. The atmosphere itself seemed to shudder. Milky shockwaves shattered clouds and swept across hundreds of miles. The small island's surface ripped open like paper, revealing yellow-brown earth. Batman and the others were hurled away like scraps. Green Lantern Hal Jordan conjured a fortress of green energy to brace against the blast, but it shattered like foam. Flash, clutching a fragile Hal, dove behind a raised hill with him. Both survived, faces pale as they watched the titanic duel overhead. The Fenrir armor was slammed back hundreds of meters. Batman lowered the armor's arms and scanned the ruins. The League's hard-won headquarters was now rubble, only foundations left. Anger flashed over his face as the armor broke the sound barrier and shot toward Atom Captain. Every time David and Atom Captain exchanged blows, the ground shook and the sky quivered, sending violent air blasts scattering the remaining clouds. Batman charged, only to be flipped aside by a backhand from Atom Captain. The armored hero barked orders. "Major Force, don't just stand there." Atom Captain's face was grim as he glanced at Major Force, who hung back, wary of engaging David. "I'll hold Overman. You capture Batman and the others," he shouted. Before he finished, David swung and sent him hurtling hundreds of meters. Atom Captain barely got his bearings when David reappeared like a thunderbolt. "You should worry about yourself first," David snarled, and with another blow, Atom Captain heard his jaw click as if metal were deforming. "After that accident, I thought nothing could hurt me," Atom Captain muttered, rubbing his chin in surprise. The nuclear test that had remade him had also given him an indestructible silver body that could withstand anything, even nuclear blasts. "Today someone actually loosened my teeth." David fired two interwoven red and purple beams from his eyes into Atom Captain's chest, an attack that could slice islands. Atom Captain merely absorbed it, a bottomless silver sink. "I was disintegrated to atoms by a wild ability, fused with alien metal and reassembled. Even a supervolcano's energy is a kitten to me," he declared. Atom Captain could absorb energy, and David's attempts to drain reactors now looked puny. Seeing his punches were less effective on David, he switched tactics and unleashed an almost endless barrage of energy beams. "Divine power is useless. Cosmic energy, atomic rays, useless," he boasted. David dodged the terrifying onslaught and frowned. Atom Captain's energy absorption was stronger than he'd anticipated. "I'll have to break through with my bare fists," he thought, channeling cosmic energy to amplify his speed and strength. A meteor of lightning, he surged forward. David's mind flickered to Diana. After the last attack on Paradise Island, she had returned home to heal. If she were here, maybe the Godkiller sword could pierce this man. But Atom Captain's atomic command resembled firestorms. He could manipulate inorganic matter. Would the Godkiller withstand that? The thought passed as David focused on the fight. With his amplified power, David's blows landed like brass knuckles on a seasoned warrior. Atom Captain recoiled as if suddenly mortal, wary of the ferocity. But his connection to the quantum field made his energy seemingly inexhaustible. Neither fighter could gain a decisive edge. On the ground, Major Force took the orders and charged at Batman and the others. "I can't handle Overman, but I can handle you," he snarled, tearing through Hal's Green Lantern construct and sending the Fenrir armor flying. Flash blasted forward and rained tens of thousands of punches on Major Force's metal torso in an instant. Major Force sneered. He reached for Flash, trying to crush him, when a sudden punch sent Major Force careening into a distant hillside, crashing into mud. Clark's cape fluttered as he slowly withdrew his fist. "Jitong, what are you doing?" Major Force spat, spluttering mud and grass as he tried to pull himself free. Jitong stood there casually rolling her hair, irritated. "He's too fast. I can't stop him," she said. Major Force's eyes widened. He couldn't effectively strike her. Her density control made her intangible and elusive. "You'd better actually try, Jitong. Don't forget you're a federal fugitive. Only by taking down the Justice League will the president sign your pardon." Jitong's attacks were punctuated by anger. She'd once robbed a bank in broad daylight, forced by circumstances to steal a small keepsake necklace that had belonged to her mother. Clark remembered that day. Despite everything, he'd let her go out of sympathy. That mercy had gotten her noticed by the government. "People from the White House?" she hissed. Clark nodded, gentle but firm. "I understand. I won't make this personal." He dodged her swings and joined the others in subduing Major Force. With Superman's involvement, Major Force began to falter. In the sky, the battle raged. Energy like white-hot fire struck David, scorching and blistering his skin. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, taking the pain to close the distance. He struck with a crushing punch that slammed into Atom Captain's face like a meteor, breaking his nose and sending him spinning. "Finally!" David thought, as Atom Captain's head rang and silver sweat dotted his forehead. Atom Captain clutched his face in disbelief. Even with his body's legendary durability, he'd felt real pain. He expected the damage to leave him bloodied, and indeed, David looked burned and torn, as if he had been thrown into the sun and crawled back out. Atom Captain smirked, thinking he'd won. "Disappointed? You can't put me down with that." David's scorched flesh visibly knit together. He panted through the pain, then smiled coldly. The Hyperion template fusion in him had progressed rapidly over the past few days, granting him near-immortal regeneration. Combined with the healing properties of divine lightning, even severe wounds sealed quickly. David had expected a tough fight and would not underestimate Atom Captain. The Silver Hero's nose healed almost instantly, and he hurled an impact wave at David. "Tough? I don't think this will be that tough," he boasted. David knew Atom Captain was dangerous in a way that could backfire. After the nuclear blast that destroyed his original body, he had reassembled himself using quantum energy. He was essentially connected to the quantum field, drawing seemingly infinite energy, but that link carried a strain. If his body became too damaged, or he had to constantly reassemble atoms to heal, the mental and energetic burden could overwhelm him. At worst, he would lose control and explode like a colossal nuclear device. Calling down divine lightning to speed his healing, David became a burning supernova and smashed through Atom Captain's torrent of beams. He reached him and slammed his fist in again. Even if he channels infinite energy, David thought as he struck, if he keeps consuming mental energy to reassemble himself, his body will collapse.